I've been a mall security guard for about 4 years when I first met a dude called Craig. Guarding was something that I fell into around 2009 when the job market went and pooped its pants. The pay was okay, I didn't mind working nights, and some of the store clerks used to work us into their 20% employee discount, which was awesome. All my coworkers were pretty laid back too, including the boss. They were just regular guys bringing home a paycheck who didn't go looking for any trouble. But then Craig got hired, and right away, we all knew that he was different. Craig was a short, balding dude with glasses who was either at the end of his 30s or the beginning of his 40s. And word had it that he'd been a security guard ever since he dropped out of high school, and that meant for a while. But you'd never have guessed it from just looking at the guy. He was shy, quiet, and didn't strike me as someone who could handle himself if things got physical. But our boss said that he'd gotten amazing reviews from his references and hadn't taken a sick day in almost 6 years straight. Now, I guess you can't train that kind of a reliability into someone, and you gotta snatch it up where you can find it. So Craig got the job, and it wasn't long before I was working shifts with him. Now, including those in the parking lot, the mall had like 20-something security cameras, meaning a lot of our job was spent sitting in front of a giant bank of screens while watching for shoplifters and car thieves. In the daytime, we were the eyes in the sky, and definitely much more of a reactive force than a proactive one. Night shifts were a different story altogether, but I'll get to that later. So one day, me and Craig are sitting in front of the screens. We can access each individual camera feed from the monitor on our computers, which we use to clip and store footage should we need to. But for the most part, we don't do that unless we've got a good reason to. So when I noticed how Craig was watching this one store without a break, I got kind of curious. When I noticed that he was watching the store that sold clothes and toys for the under fives, I asked if he'd spotted something suspicious. Now, it's kind of sad, but that store was one of the biggest shoplifting spots in the whole mall. I guess the junkies figured out that formula and baby clothes sold fast over at the Hundreds block, so it became a real problem after a while. But then when I asked him, Craig switched over to the camera feed of another store and sort of said something like, "Oh, never mind. It was nothing." Now, I didn't pay it much mind at the time. I did the same thing myself from time to time, but then that same shift, about an hour before clock-out time, I caught him doing it again. And that time, he just straight up denied it. Now, I said something like, "Watching the baby store again, huh?" And then he just sort of flicked over to another store again, saying, "What? No." Now, I somehow got into my head that he had some crush on the girl who worked there, and in all fairness, she was cute, so it did track. I also thought that I had a little theory confirmed when I teased him with the prospect, and he turned as red as a stop sign. Now, I said, "You are into her, aren't you? You gonna ask her out? Come on, do it, dude. Don't be a wuss." He didn't get mad or anything. He just told me to stop while trying to keep a grin off his face. I left him alone, but not enough being like, turns out you're human after all. You're alright, kid." I clocked out maybe an hour or two later, and Craig grinned as I said, "Hey, don't let anyone else catch you crushing on the baby store girl again. They'll think you're stalking her." Over the next month or so, I was on a sort of string of night shifts watching the mall overnight, and 2 of those shifts were spent with Craig. I didn't see him as creepy robot anymore, just a quiet guy who focused on what was in front of him. But I did give him hell about not asking the baby store girl out yet. I told him to live a little, because the worst she could say is no. It's not even like he had to go anywhere near the store during daylight hours either, not unless it was an emergency. But still, all he did was grin and tell me to just buzz off. Now, night shifts were different to days in that we actively patrolled the mall complex once every half hour. Now, one guy would leave the office and take a walk around, while the others stayed behind to watch his back from the screen bank. We wouldn't always keep our eyes glued to the screens, not unless the walker called on the radio. So as Craig was walking around the mall from the 2:30 a.m. patrol, I wasn't paying attention to what he was doing. And not until I happened to look up and see that one of the store's shutters had been partially opened. Now, right away, I radioed over to Craig saying, "Dude, one of the stores is unlocked." And then I had this weird sort of like twin moment of realization as 2 thoughts hit me at once. Craig wasn't answering his radio, and the store that was open was the baby clothes store. Now right away I'm thinking, uh-oh, Craig's in the baby store, mainly because we were not allowed to just walk into the stores after closing time, not unless something serious is going down. And since Craig was so reliable, I figured that there's no way that he'd be risking his job like that unless there was something wrong. So I grabbed my keys, and off I went to the baby clothes store. Now a few minutes later, I'm ducking under the half-raised shutter, yelling out, "Craig, you in here, buddy?" And immediately he responds, "Yeah, I'm here," and steps out from behind one of the displays. He almost scared the crap out of me, and then I asked what the hell he was doing, and he told me he thought he heard something from inside the store. Now I say, "Dude, why didn't you hit me up on the radio? That's why I'm here." As in, why I was sitting at the screen bank. Now he hears something, he calls it in, and I can see past the shutters and into the store with nothing but a swivel in my chair. So as soon as he said it, I knew his excuse was nonsense, and I reminded him of what he was doing might actually get his butt fired. And it was like dealing with some dumb newbie. Only Craig was not some dumb newbie. He knew the job, and he was pretty good at it, so it made exactly zero sense to me why he was acting the way he was. And so the next night, Craig kind of thanks me for, I don't know, caring about him, I guess. And he thanked me for not telling on him, and he also thanked me for getting him out of that store, which was weird because it was almost like the way an alcoholic might thank you for stopping him from drinking. And I guess that didn't ring the alarm bells that it should have, because at the time I just wanted to know what he was doing in the baby store so late. And that's when he broke eye contact and said something sort of like, I'm gonna be a father. And then right as I'm about to congratulate him, he added, "And I'm scared." I told him something along the lines of, "It's okay to be scared, but I'm sure you'll be fine." But I didn't mean it. Not because I'm the kind to offer empty platitudes, but because I didn't believe him. I'm not saying that I have a particularly advanced bullcrap detector or anything like that. I just don't care how quiet a guy is. If his wife or girlfriend is pregnant, he complains to his buddies at work about it. Even if Craig wasn't the type to complain about it, I didn't buy him not bringing it up before that moment when I confronted him about that store. And I didn't all the way confront him, as in like I didn't call him out on complaining that he was going to be a dad. I just knew that from then on that he was hiding something, or at least he was maybe hiding something. It was just enough to affect my opinion of him until I knew what that thing was, and when I found out, it was almost like a bomb going off. Craig acted nice and normal for the rest of the time we worked together. I didn't catch him staring at stores, and I didn't catch him in any stores after hours either. He was just Craig. Quiet, weird Craig who lied about having a pregnant baby mama because the next time I asked about it, he totally responded to me saying, "Huh? Oh, yeah, she's fine," when I asked about her. Now, I thought it was weird as hell to lie about something like that, and I hoped that the real reason wasn't like sinister or anything. But that, as it turned out, was nothing but wishful thinking. And on a day when I had to do night shift with Craig, a friend of mine sent a message to the Facebook group chat we shared. Now, the first notification read something like, "Chris sent a video," and then the rest were him sending things like, "Oh my god, LMAO, check out this loser freak." And he used to send tons of stuff like that to the group chat. Weird videos or memes and all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes they were really funny, and other times they made your skin crawl. In this case, the video was most definitely of the skin-crawling variety. When I opened it, all the camera showed was what looked like a kid's room, and then out of nowhere, a grown man dressed as a baby walked into the shot and then turned towards the camera. He was wearing one of those weird baby hats, the bonnets, and some makeup, and had this almost oversized pacifier in his mouth. So at first I didn't recognize him, but he had to take the pacifier out to speak, and when he did, I suddenly realized what I was looking at. It was Craig, the adult baby now babbling about mommy and having a full die-die, and then pretending to cry, saying, "Wah, wah, wah." I remember closing the video, and then just standing there in my kitchen for a second or two, just not really knowing what to do with myself. Obviously, one of the thoughts going through my head was, that's why Craig was in the goddamn baby store. He obviously couldn't wear any of the clothes there, but knowing why he was interested in them made my skin feel like it wanted to crawl off my bones. But then my other thoughts involved stuff like, was Craig dangerous? Was he some kind of PDF file whose thing was dressing up like a baby? I had no idea, and it's not like I wanted to dedicate any brain power to it either. It made me feel uneasy and very queasy thinking about Craig all dressed up like that, but it made me even queasier thinking that I had to spend 10 hours in a shopping mall with him, completely alone. I ended up calling my buddy Chris, the one who sent the video, to ask where he'd found it and how many people he'd sent it to. He said someone from his job sent it to him and that he'd sent it to just about everyone he knew, with obvious exceptions for family. Now that meant the video was going around town, so it wasn't going to be long until Craig got recognized for being the giant man baby in it. And while a heck of a lot of people were going to laugh their butts off at him, I knew that there would be people that thought he was a predator and would want to hurt him. But was he a predator? Or was he just some harmless weirdo? Now that was the real question, so that night while we were at work, I decided to just ask him about it. It was probably one of the most awkward and creepy exchanges of my entire life, and it took me like 3 hours to work up to it too. I wasn't scared of Craig, at least I wasn't physically intimidated by him, but if I confronted him on what was no doubt a deep, dark secret, what was to stop him from freaking out and pulling a knife on me or something? Even if he didn't and just straight up denied all knowledge, spending the rest of my shift with him was going to be awkward as hell, so it was definitely a period where I thought to myself, just mind your own business and let whatever happens happen. But I couldn't, and in the end, I asked him. The second I said, "Hey Craig, I saw this video today," he turned even redder than I had asked him if he had a crush. Now, I cut myself off after the day and just watched his reaction to sort of gauge it, and I swear to God, Craig started sweating right there in front of me. I told him I figured that he knew which video I was talking about, but he didn't move and he didn't say anything. He just stayed sat in his chair, eyes locked on the screen bank, swearing and shaking like he was coming down with some fever. I guess I didn't really know where to go from there. He'd already admitted it silently, but it was an admission all the same. And I don't think I expected him to do anything but deny it till he was blue in the face. And so once I had the admission, I went to what I considered the most important question of all, which was, "Craig, are you a weirdo for kids?" And then, and only then, did I get a reaction. His head spun around and he says, "No, it's not like that, dude. I swear to God, I'm not." It was a very strong reaction and one that had a pinch of outrage to it, and not the kind of "please believe me" that you get when someone is lying to save their skin. Now, I guess I never truly know for sure, but in the moment, his answer, it rang true and I believed him, but that still left the question of what the hell was he doing making those videos? And I guess it might sound a bit weird, but I kind of backed off on wanting to know why. I mean, I could probably take a shot in the dark and it wouldn't be too far off, but even if I knew, it wouldn't change anything. Craig was weird. Really weird, actually, but as far as I knew, he was harmless, and I actually kind of liked the guy too, so there was that. And then, because I liked him, I knew he didn't deserve what was definitely coming his way, and I told him to quite literally get the hell out of town. And Craig knew it too. He knew that once people saw that video, and knew the guy who made it was a security guard down at the mall, it wasn't just his job he'd be in danger of losing. And so even though his record was clean and I didn't personally believe that he was some kind of diddler, the best thing for him to do was leave town and start over someplace else. And once I was done giving my speech, Craig looked like he was searching for the right words, and then he burst into tears out of nowhere, and he didn't stop crying for a good couple of minutes. Now don't get me wrong, I didn't feel too bad for him. Uploading videos like that was dumb as hell, and it was only a matter of time before someone recognized him. But his dumb mistake had ruined his life, or at least it was going to ruin his life if he didn't find someplace far away to live, and fast. Well, that was the last I saw of Craig. When we clocked out, he thanked me for letting him know that his video was going viral, and then told me that I might not see him around much anymore. I told him I was sorry to hear that, but it was for the best. He needed a fresh start someplace else, and he needed to fix whatever needed fixing so he didn't feel the need to put that kind of crap online. Because it was either going to get him hurt, or, this was half the reason I felt very little sympathy for him, I felt like whatever his thing was specifically, it had the potential to turn into something dangerous. Like maybe he was telling the truth when I asked him if he wasn't some kid like her or not, but people change, right? For better and for worse. And a dude who dresses up like a baby and chooses to do so in some skimpy little diaper thing and not like a onesie, that stuff's gotta have the potential to get worse. I don't care what anyone says, and I say that as a father of 2 daughters. Craig was gone by the time everyone realized what he was posting. All our coworkers either got sent the video directly or they got told about it at work. And so Craig's reputation was just about obliterated come the end of the week. Our boss said it was good that he got the hell out of town because he'd have fired his butt if he tried to stick around. There was a lot of hate towards Craig like that, and I get it. But all I really feel anymore when I think about him is fear. I hope he's doing okay and that he found a good woman or man or whatever and settled down, because one of the alternatives is that he didn't get himself together and he got worse. And then if he gets worse, maybe he'll do something terrible with a kid or a baby. And then it'll kind of be my fault for not taking him around the back of the mall and shooting him when I had the goddamn chance. I've worked in medical science for nearly 20 years now, mostly as a lab technician, but also as a coordinator and principal investigator. And many years ago now, I used to work in a small medical clinic in the Greater London area. We mostly ran blood and urine tests, and while we had an x-ray room and a few other things too, it was 95% blood and urine week in and week out. And as you can imagine, we're exceptionally careful when handling samples. I can't imagine many of you have received calls saying, we misplaced that blood you gave us. Can you come back and give us some more? And that's because we're really careful with them. And so one day, when one of our nurses came to us saying that he dropped our sample, our first thought was concern, and not for the bloody sample, but for him. Now, I don't want to use his real name because that'll give away which clinic this took place in, so I'll just call him Dave. And when Dave dropped a sample, I was worried that he might not be feeling well. When I asked him what happened, Dave said that the beaker dropped from his grip after he suddenly became lightheaded. So we sent him home for 2 days, then he came back feeling much better. Now, Dave was a great nurse, an asset to the clinic, and God knows we wanted to look after him. So a couple of weeks later, when it happened for a second time, I recommended that he just go to the doctors for a full checkup. Dizzy spells can be a sign of some pretty nasty illnesses, but following a full medical exam, he was told that there was nothing wrong with him. We were relieved, why wouldn't we be? Not to mention, Dave did admit to skipping breakfast on the day of the second spill. So once again, it passed without too much suspicion, and Dave continued to work at the clinic. But then came the day that I walked in on him doing something that I told myself was impossible, and it felt like I was hit by a train. We trusted Dave to be alone with the samples, so it wasn't in the least bit unusual for him to be left alone and uninterrupted for sometimes long periods of time. So when I walked into the containment lab, I caught him by surprise, just as he was lowering a sample beaker of urine from his mouth. I froze. He froze. Then he dropped the beaker to the floor and mumbled something like, I dropped it. But it was too late. I'd seen everything, and there was no unseeing it either. Dave begged me not to tell anyone. He swore that he'd never do it again, and even offered me money to keep quiet. But what else could I do? To say his behavior constituted gross misconduct would be putting it mildly, and we simply couldn't have anyone with such inclinations around the clinic. End of story. As you can imagine, it was quite a big deal, but all the General Medical Council was interested in was keeping it out of the papers, so when Dave just sort of disappeared, it suited everyone just fine. It was the end of our problem, but not the end of his problem, because procedure stated that we pass on what we'd learned to the police. Dave had broken laws pertaining to the mishandling of biological materials, which covers everything from blood to stool samples. It was unlikely that he'd be locked up. A first offense would get him a fine and suspended sentence at most, so we were told, but he'd never be able to work in the health service ever again. His life as he knew it was over. But to be fair, he probably should have thought about that before he decided to take a shot of piss right as I walked in. Now anyway, life moves on without Dave, and although we missed his skills and experience, we did not miss the feeling of knowing that there was someone like that working amongst us. I think it was like 6 or 7 weeks, long enough that we'd almost let the whole sorry episode slip from our minds, or at least I personally almost had anyway. And then one day, after driving home from work, a car pulled into my driveway behind me, having followed me home from the clinic to block me in. Now, I knew who it was the moment I saw the car. I'd seen that car almost every day in the clinic's car park for almost 3 years. It was Dave's car, and he had followed me home. He walked down my driveway towards me as I got out of my car, shouting at him to get away from my house before I called the police. Now, I made such a racket that my husband actually came out, and our kids watched from the front window as he walked Dave back up the driveway. He wasn't polite about it either, neither of them were, and Dave only started to back off once my husband had promised to bounce his head off the concrete. We reported him to the police, but since Dave was out on bail, there wasn't much that they could do unless they caught him in the act of actually threatening us. All they could do as it stood was warn him to stay away from me, or his attempts to do so would constitute harassment. But it didn't stop him, and things only got worse. It all culminated with Dave trying to drive me off the road one evening when I was on my way home from work. I knew I was in trouble from the second I looked in my rear view and saw his car in the road behind me. I just didn't think that he was mental enough to try and scare me in such a dangerous situation. I don't think he wanted me dead. Or maybe he did, who knows. But if I think he really wanted to murder me, he could have done it with a knife come closing time at the clinic. However, that didn't make what he did any less frightening because his reckless driving ended up with me careening off the road and into a ditch. I wasn't hurt, not too bad anyway, but I did need to go to the hospital to get checked out just in case. It was a horrible experience, but like many dark clouds, it did have a silver lining. Dave's dangerous driving had been caught on several cameras, meaning he was swiftly arrested and kept on remand before his trial since it was deemed that he was a threat to the public. That new dangerous driving charge meant prison was now on the cards, and although he only got 3 months for all the offenses he racked up, it was still 3 months where we could all feel safe again. He didn't bother coming back to do anything, not to my house or to the clinic. He did 3 months of a 6-month sentence, meaning any other offense would have him recalled to prison. Now, I was appalled at what a light sentence he got at first, but now I actually appreciate how smart it was. 3 months is nothing to sniff at for a first-time blag, and then the prospect of another 3 months in jail was enough to deter Dave from any further threatening interactions. And it's a bloody good thing that he didn't turn up at our house again, because I swear my husband would have done time for murder.
I told myself I was only staying at Miles and Claire's place until life stopped kicking me in the ribs. That was the version I gave people, anyway. In reality, my girlfriend had thrown me out of her condo in Tampa after she had caught me messaging someone behind her back. I never admitted that part. To Miles, I said that Lacey had gone crazy, and that I had no idea why she suddenly wanted me gone. Miles believed me, because Miles had always believed me. We had been friends since community college, back when we were both broke, dumb, and convinced that loyalty meant never asking too many questions. So, when he and Claire let me crash in the spare room of their townhouse, I acted grateful. I brought chocolates. I cleaned a pan once. I kept saying things like, "Seriously, man, I owe you." But deep down, I also felt like Miles owed me a little. He had the stable job, the nice rental, the pretty wife who made dinner and smiled at him like he was the safest person alive. I had a duffel bag, a dead-end job at an auto parts warehouse, and a breakup that everyone was pretending not to judge me for. Claire was nice to me. That was the problem. She asked if I wanted coffee in the morning. She knocked before coming into the guest room. She once laughed at a stupid joke that I made about Miles snoring like a dying lawnmower. It was nothing. I knew it was nothing. But when you're sleeping in another man's house, watching him live the version of life you thought you deserved, nothing starts feeling personal. The picture happened by accident at first. Miles had handed me his phone one afternoon so that I could look up a takeout place he liked. A notification popped up from his cloud photo app, and before I could stop myself, I swiped. I found a private picture of Claire, clearly meant only for him. I should have put the phone down. I should have felt disgusted with myself. But instead, I felt cheated. Not by Claire, not exactly, by the universe. Miles had this woman, this marriage, this warm house where people trusted him. And there I was, sleeping 10 feet away like a charity case. So, I sent the photo to myself. I deleted the message from Miles's phone, and I convinced myself that it didn't count as anything real. I wasn't going to post it. I wasn't going to show anyone. I wasn't even going to tell Claire. It was just a picture, a secret souvenir, a private little proof that Miles did not have everything locked away from me. That became my excuse every time that I opened it. But it didn't stop there. The next day, I was back at it. And the day after. It became the only thing that I looked forward to. During the day, I'd play the part, the grateful friend who helped Claire unload groceries from her car, who sat at the kitchen island while she cooked and told her, Miles is lucky as hell. Most guys don't get a wife who still looks at them the way you look at him. She'd smile and say something like, he's a good man. We both got lucky. But looking at her drove me crazy. One afternoon, when Miles was at work, I accidentally walked into the kitchen while she was getting something from a lower cabinet. "You're terrible, Ryan," she said. She was clearly loving the attention. Another night, I told Miles over beers, "Man, if I had a girl like Claire, I'd never let her out of the house. You're doing it right." He just grinned and clapped me on the back like I was still the same dumb, loyal friend from college. I told them both that Lacey had been the one cheating, that she had thrown me out after I confronted her. Claire looked at me with real sympathy one morning over coffee. "I'm so sorry, Ryan. You didn't deserve that." I nodded and let her pour me another cup. One morning, when they were both out, I went through the laundry basket. By the end of the week, I was paranoid and hooked at the same time. I started noticing Claire looking at me a second too long sometimes, or Miles asking if I was sleeping okay. I told myself it was nothing. They trusted me. I was family. Well, one Saturday morning, Miles had left early for a golf thing with the guys from his office. Claire knocked on my door at around 10, probably to see if I wanted the breakfast that she was making. I had my headphones on, the photo open on my laptop. "Ryan, I made pancakes." "Oh my God." She stood there, frozen, eyes wide on the screen. I slammed the laptop closed, but it was too late. "Claire, damn, it's not what it looks like. Don't!" Her voice was shaking, but loud. "Don't you dare lie to me right now. That picture, did Miles give it to you?" I forced a casual tone, even as my pulse hammered in my ears. "Yeah, Miles and I go way back. He showed it to me one night when we were drinking. Said it was just fine, just between us buddies. It was a one-time thing. I was curious, that's all. I was going to delete it right after Claire didn't move. Her face had gone pale and her breathing was shallow. She looked at the closed laptop like it was something dirty. And then she looked at me the same way. delete the picture once you're done," she said quietly. Her voice had stopped shaking, but it was cold now. "And don't come near me again." She turned and walked out of the guest room without another word. I heard her go down the stairs, and then I heard the front door open and close a few minutes later. She had left the house. I sat there for a long time. Part of me felt sick. The other part felt relieved. She hadn't screamed for miles. She hadn't called the cops. Like, she got it. Like, maybe she had liked the attention after all. The way she had grinned that day in the kitchen. I deleted the file from the laptop and I emptied the trash. But the copy on my phone stayed. I would delete it later, I told myself. I had sent it to myself that first day from Miles's phone and it was still in my messages, just in case. The house felt different after that. Claire came home eventually, but she stayed in their bedroom mostly. When Miles got back from work, she acted normal enough around him, but I could feel her watching me when he wasn't looking. I played the grateful guest harder than ever. I unloaded groceries without being asked. I washed dishes. I told Miles how lucky he was, loud enough for her to hear from the other room. Well, one night, a couple of days later, Claire was at work late. Miles and I ended up on the couch with beers, watching old sci-fi reruns, the way we used to back in community college. It almost felt like old times. I had a few. He had more. At some point, I got up to grab another beer, and I left my phone on the cushion next to me, screen up. When I got back, Miles had changed. His shoulders were rigid. He laughed at something on the screen, but it came a beat too late. I knew that look from years of knowing him. It was the look of a man who had seen something that he wished he could unsee. He didn't say a word about it. Not then. He just sat there pretending that everything was fine until the episode ended and he said that he was tired and went to bed. That made it worse. The next day, he was careful around me. Too careful. He asked questions while we ate breakfast, trying to sound casual. "So, what really happened with Lacey? You said she went crazy, but you never really told me why she threw you out. You and Claire talk much when I'm not around? She seems stressed lately." I lied the way I always lied when it mattered. Smooth. Just enough detail to sound real. She was cheating on me. I called her on it, and she turned it around and said I was the problem. And Claire's been fine. We haven't really talked much. She's got a lot on her plate. He nodded, but his eyes didn't believe me. Or maybe they did, and he just didn't want to deal with it yet. Well then, the next evening, I was in the shower getting ready for my shift at the warehouse. I thought maybe the weirdness had passed. I was wrong. The bathroom door exploded open, slamming into the wall hard enough to leave a dent. I yanked the curtain aside, water stinging my eyes, and Miles was standing there holding my phone. His face was flushed dark red, his jaw tight like he was grinding his teeth to dust. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he roared. "Jesus, Miles, get out! What are you doing with my phone?" He didn't back up. He stepped into the room. "Why do you have a picture of my wife on your phone?" It wasn't a question looking for answers. It was an accusation looking for a fight. Wait. Let me explain. He shoved me in the chest. My bare feet slid on the wet floor, and I caught myself on the edge of the sink. The humiliation of almost falling in front of him made me angry. I shoved him back. He swung wild, his knuckles catching the side of my face with a bright flash of pain. I lunged forward and tackled him into the towel rack. We crashed around the tiny space like idiots, slipping on the tile, knocking half of the bottles off of the shower shelf into the tub with a plastic clatter. For a few seconds, it was just grunting and pushing and trying not to fall. And then he got a hold of my collar and he drove me back against the wall. My head hit hard enough to make lights spark behind my eyes. "Hey, I took it off your phone that day that you let me use it," I said, the words tumbling out. It was stupid. I was drunk and I was lonely and I wasn't thinking. I'm sorry, man. I crossed a line. I know I did. He kept me pinned there, breathing hard through his nose. I could see him trying to decide what to do with me. "Oh, come on. It was just one picture. You still have the wife. You still have the house. You won in life." He stared at me for a long moment. And then something in him seemed to give up. He let go of my collar and he stepped back. He took my phone, had me unlock it, and went through it until he found the photo. He deleted it. And then he checked for any other copies, and he deleted those, too. "Pack your things. I want you out of my house." I tried to say something else, but he walked out. When Claire got home a little later, I was in the living room with my duffel bag by the door, my cheek puffing up where he had hit me. I tried one last time. "Claire, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. I was messed up after everything with Leslie." She looked at me like I was a stranger. Worse than a stranger. Like something filthy that she had stepped in. Her lip curled slightly and she didn't say a word. She just walked past me into the kitchen. That look stayed with me more than the bruise forming on my face. I left. I sent the texts from the parking lot of the motel that I found. Long, careful messages to both of them. I told Miles that I had made a mistake. I told Claire that I respected her. I told them both that I wasn't some creep, that I had never meant to hurt anyone, that I'd just been in a dark place. I said I didn't want Claire to see me that way. I cared what she thought of me. They didn't answer. Or if they did, it was to say they were done. That they were talking about what to do next. Police. Restraining orders. Whatever people do when they decide that you're dangerous over one picture that never left my phone. Well, by midnight, the shame had burned away, and it left something harder behind. Miles had put his hands on me in his own bathroom. Claire had looked at me like I was less than human. They were acting like I had done something unforgivable when all I had done was take one picture. They had the life, the jobs, the marriage, the safety. And now they were taking even the small piece of it that I had let myself have. Well, the next evening I went back. I didn't know what I expected. Yeah, maybe for Claire to have talked him down. Maybe for an apology from them. Miles opened the door with the chain still on. Claire stood behind him with her arms crossed tight. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I'm ashamed. I'll get help. I'll do whatever you want. I don't want to lose you guys. Miles looked at me like he was already done. Our friendship is over, Ryan. Don't come back. I felt the words hit, and something in me pushed back before I could even stop it. Fine. But don't act like this is some one-way thing forever. One day I'll have a wife too. And when I do, you can have her pictures. Maybe we'll swap the women on birthdays. Call it even. Claire's mouth opened like she had been slapped. Miles' face went blank, his eyes flat and empty. He didn't say another word. He just closed the door, the chain rattling as it caught, and then the deadbolt turned with a final click. I stood there on their front step for a minute, and then I turned and walked away. He was overreacting. Claire would text in a day or two once she calmed down. We could figure this out. I told myself that with every step. But the truth was, I was angry. And I was hurt. They had treated a picture like a crime. like I was some kind of predator. It had only been a picture. My name is David. I'm 28, an ER attending at St. Luke's in Chicago. Or I was. 12 years of med school, residency, night shifts, saving lives. None of it prepared me for the moment my own life imploded. Julia and I had been together for almost 5 years. We met at a hospital fundraiser. She was there representing a non-profit that provided mental health services to low-income families. We started dating casually and then seriously. She moved into my apartment after 2 years. We talked about marriage, kids someday, the usual things couples say when they're comfortable. My schedule was brutal. 80-hour weeks, back-to-back traumas, codes that ended badly. I'd come home at dawn, collapse on the couch, and wake up to her already gone to work. Intimacy became infrequent, mechanical. She'd ask why I was always tired, why I never initiated anymore. I'd apologize, promise to do better, and then get called back in for another shift. She stopped asking. One night we had a big fight. It's always the hospital, I get it. You're saving lives. But mine is slipping away while I wait for you to notice I'm still here. We argued for an hour. She cried. I got defensive. And by the end, she was packing a suitcase. She had a job offer in Seattle. Better pay, better hours, a fresh start. She booked a flight for the following week. The day she left, I worked a double. When I finally got home, the apartment felt too quiet. Her side of the closet was empty. Her shampoo was gone from the shower. I opened my wallet to pay for delivery, and I saw the photo that we had taken in Mexico 2 summers earlier. Her laughing, head thrown back, my arm around her waist. I sat on the floor and lost it. Sobs came hard, the kind that make your ribs ache. I grabbed my phone and called Joe. Joe had been my best friend since undergrad. Same med school, same residency program, now both attendings in the ER. He's the guy who drags me out for beers when I've had a bad shift. The one who tells me straight when I'm being an idiot. He picked up the 5th time I called him. David? You okay, man? No. Julia left. She's moving to Seattle. Silence for a second. Then, where are you? Home. I don't know what to do. Come to the party. I'm at this costume thing at a friend's house. It'll get your mind off of it. Or at least get you drunk enough to forget for a few hours. I'm not in the mood for a party, Joe. You will be after a couple of drinks, trust me. Come on, brother, don't sit there alone. I hung up, wiped my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. Eyes red, shirt wrinkled. I changed into jeans and a tee, grabbed my keys, and drove. The party was in a house. People in elaborate costumes, superheroes, zombies. One guy is a giant hot dog. I spotted Joe right away. He was dressed as the Joker. He saw me, waved me over, and handed me a beer. You look like hell, he said, clapping my shoulder. But you're here. That's step 1. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. I told him the details. Her new job, the fight, how empty the apartment felt. He listened, nodded, told me to focus on work, that time would help, that I'd meet someone else eventually. She's gone, man. You can't force it. Just keep moving. I nodded, but the beer wasn't helping. The noise was too much. I told him I needed air, and I stepped outside. The sidewalk was cold. I sat on the curb, head in my hands, crying again, like a kid. People walked past, pretending not to notice. After a while, I got up and drove to her old apartment building. Our old place, technically, until the lease ended. I buzzed, No answer. Called her phone. Straight to voicemail. I stood in the lobby for 10 minutes and then left. I didn't plan to go back to the party, but my car seemed to steer itself there. Maybe I needed to see Joe again. Hear him say it would be okay one more time. Inside, the music was louder. I asked a woman dressed as a cat where Joe was. "Upstairs," she said, pointing. "Private room. He's with some girl. They've been up there a while." The door was cracked. I pushed it open. What the hell? Joe froze. Julia twisted her head and saw me. "David," she breathed. Joe dropped the crop. "Dave, man, this isn't... Don't stop, please." Joe hesitated, looked at me, and then back at her. I stood there, numb. "Julia, what are you doing?" "What does it look like? Getting what I need. You were never there, David." "With my best friend?" "He's here. He's present. He listens to what I say." I felt the room tilt. The vase on the side table, some cheap glass thing, was in my hand before I'd even realized I'd grabbed it. I threw it. It hit her temple with a dull thud. She crumpled. "David!" She groaned, tried to sit up. I backed away. I didn't mean... Joe was already on his phone. "Yes, police, we need help. Assault." Julia, dazed, looked at me with something close to triumph. "You finally did something," she whispered. The cops arrived fast. She'd told them that I'd attacked her unprovoked, showed the welts on her back and legs from the crop, marks that she said were from me. Joe backed her up, said that he'd tried to stop me. They cuffed me, read my rights. I didn't fight. In the cell now, days later, I keep seeing her face. I thought love was gentle, safe, supportive. I thought that's what women wanted. I was wrong. Julia is an animal. If you're watching this somehow, be careful who you let in. My name is Matt, and this happened 6 years ago, back when I was in Chicago trying to make things better after my divorce. I bought that fancy Canon camera on a whim during better times. Thought it'd kickstart a side hustle in videography. But life had other plans. Alimony payments. So I listed it on eBay for $1,500, hoping for a quick flip. The bid came in fast. Some guy named Alex messaged me right away. "Hey Matt, love the camera specs. Need it for a shoot down south. Can you ship it directly to the location? I'll pay extra for express." I figured, why not? He seemed legit. Profile had a few positive reviews. We chatted back and forth. "Perfect condition, right? No scratches?" he asked. "Absolutely," I replied. "Used it maybe a dozen times. Comes with all the lenses in case." "Cool. Paying via PayPal now. Address is 214 Elm Street, Smallville, Oklahoma. Make it priority." The money hit my account that afternoon. $1,500 plus $50 for shipping. I boxed it up, slapped on the label, and dropped it off at the post office. Felt good, like a weight lifting. That night, I even treated myself to a beer at the corner bar, flirting with the bartender, Sarah. We'd been circling each other for weeks. "Finally sold that damn camera," I told her, clinking glasses. Maybe now I can take you out proper." She laughed. "Oh, yeah? What's the plan, hotshot?" "Dinner, movie, whatever. No more ramen nights." But 2 days later, my phone rang while I was at work stocking shelves at the hardware store. It was PayPal. Mr. Thompson, this is Lisa from Fraud Prevention. The payment for your recent transaction was made with a stolen credit card. The cardholder has disputed the charge. My heart dropped. What? But I already shipped it. The money's in my account. I'm sorry, sir. We've reversed the transaction. You'll see the debit soon. Reversed? That's $1,500. I can't afford that. The package is delivered. Tracking says that it arrived yesterday. She sighed, like she'd heard this 100 times. We recommend contacting local authorities, but PayPal's policy's clear. Seller protection doesn't cover this if the address wasn't verified. I hung up, furious. My boss let me off early, seeing the steam coming out of my ears. I paced the apartment, staring at the tracking confirmation. Delivered to some podunk town in Oklahoma. Who the hell was this Alex? I dug into the address online. Public records, Google Maps. It led to a modest house on the edge of Smallville, population maybe 2,000. And get this, the owner was the freaking mayor, Harlan Brooks. I called the local police non-emergency line. Yeah, hi, this is Matt Thompson from Chicago. I think I shipped stolen property to an address in your town. Got scammed out of a $1,500 camera. The dispatcher transferred me to a detective named Ramirez. Stolen how? He asked. Buyer used a hacked card. PayPal yanked the money back, but the package is at 214 Elm Street. That's Mayor Brooks's place, right? A pause. Yeah, that's Harlan. Look, son, this sounds like one of those reshipping scams. We've had a few reports. I'll look into it. Reshipping? What's that? Criminals overseas get folks here to forward packages. They pay them peanuts, claim it's legit work from home. Electronics, clothes, stuff bought with stolen cards. Gets laundered through middlemen. Jesus. So the mayor's in on it? Not saying that, but I'll pay him a visit. I couldn't sit still. That night, I vented to Sarah over the phone. This is divorced, alimony, and now scammed? Karma's got a hard-on for me. Oh, Matt, don't beat yourself up, she said softly. People are Come by the bar tomorrow. Drinks on me. The next day, Detective Ramirez called back. Talked to Harlan. He admitted receiving packages. Says a guy online hired him for logistics assistance. Gets $20 per box to repack and ship to Russia. Didn't think it was shady. Yet he didn't know. Electronics and clothes? Come on. He's 62, semi-retired. Claims that he needed the extra cash after his wife passed. But, yeah, your camera's gone. Shipped out already. We can't recover it internationally. So that's it. I lose $1,500 and he walks? He's cooperating. No priors. Probably a warning, maybe a fine. These scams are global. Hard to prosecute the little fish. I thanked him, but rage boiled over. I looked up Harlan's number. Small town, easy to find. Dialed it that evening. Brooks residence, a weary voice answered. Mayor Brooks, this is Matt Thompson. You got my camera. A long sigh. Oh, hell. The detective mentioned you. Look, son, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was stolen goods. How could you not? Strangers sending you high-end tech to forward to Russia? For $20? I was desperate. Betty died last year. Medical bills piled up. This ad popped up online. Easy money, no heavy lifting. They said that it was overstock from warehouses. I got maybe a dozen packages, laptops, dresses, shoes. Shipped them up to some P.O. box in Moscow. Dresses? Shoes? So women's stuff, too? Yeah, designer brands. Figured it was returns or something. You ruined me, you know that? That money was for my life. Bills. Starting over after my ex took half. I get it. I've been there. Lost everything to those hospital vultures. But I swear I stopped after the cops showed up. Burned the last labels. We talked for 20 minutes. He sounded broken. Not evil, just stupid and grieving. If I could pay you back, I would, but I'm scraping by on pension now. I hung up, deflated. PayPal wouldn't budge. eBay sympathized, but no dice. I was out $1,500, back to square one. That loss hit hard. I skipped the bar for weeks, buried in overtime. Sarah messaged a few times. Matt, you ghosting me? Come on, talk. Months later, I sold some old comics, paid down debt, got a better job editing videos freelance. Sarah and I dated for a year. Didn't last, but it taught me resilience. As for Harlan, I heard he lost the next election. Small town scandal. My name's Olivia, and back then I was just a single mom. My ex had left me with a house full of his crap, including this massive 55-inch flat-screen TV that he swore was top of the line, but really just collected dust in the living room. I didn't need it. My daughter, Lily, and I were downsizing to a smaller apartment anyway, so I posted it on Craigslist for $200, figuring it'd go quick. Gently used Samsung TV. Perfect condition. Pickup only, I wrote. Added a few photos and hit publish. The responses came flooding in almost immediately. Most were the usual lowballers or no-shows. But one guy stood out. His name was Zachary, or at least that's what he said in his email. Hey, interested in the TV. Can meet today? Cash in hand. Straight to the point, no haggling. I replied back, sure, $200 firm. Where are you located? He was in the next town over, about 20 minutes away. We exchanged a few messages, and he seemed normal enough. Mentioned he was getting it for his apartment with his boyfriend. Cool. No red flags there. But then, things got weird. I suggested he come by my place to pick it up. Nah, I don't do house visits. He shot back, too risky. Risky? I thought. Okay, fair enough. I've heard horror stories about Craigslist deals gone wrong, especially as a woman. I didn't push it. No problem, I typed. I can drop it off at yours if you PayPal me first. His response was almost instant. Hell no! You think I'm giving you my address? That's how people get murdered. Murdered? I stared at my phone, half laughing, half annoyed. Who the hell did he think I was? Some serial killer? I'm 5'5", a life coach, and my biggest crime was binge-watching Netflix while eating ice cream straight from the tub. But hey, paranoia is real these days. Alright, how about we meet after my daughter's soccer game? Public park, lots of people around. I figured that eases mind. Daylight, families everywhere. Nope, he replied. You'll have too many of your people there. Could be a setup. My people? What, like I had a gang of soccer moms ready to ambush him? I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they'd stick. Lily was kicking a ball around the backyard while I paced the kitchen, muttering to myself, "This guy's nuts," I said aloud. But I needed the money. Rent was due, and $200 would cover groceries for the week. So I tried again. Fine. How about the parking lot of the grocery store in town? 3:30 p.m., broad daylight, cameras everywhere. There was a long pause. I could see the typing bubbles come and go. Finally. No way. Too isolated. People get jumped in parking lots all the time. Isolated? It was the busiest spot in our sleepy suburb. Moms with strollers, old folks buying lotto tickets. At this point, I was tempted to just block him and move on, but something about his fear made me curious. Was he Traumatized? Or just watching too many things online? Okay, last idea, I wrote. In front of the police station. Can't get safer than that. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. Fine, but I'm bringing my boyfriend and 2 friends, and I'll call an officer out to witness. Jesus, I thought, this was escalating to full-on drama. Whatever makes you comfortable, I replied, trying to sound chill. Inside, I was cracking up. Lily overheard me on the phone with my best friend Susan later that night. "Mom, why is that guy so scared of you?" she asked, giggling. Am I scary? I struck a pose like a monster, and we both laughed until our sides hurt. The next afternoon, I loaded the TV into my SUV, carefully wrapping it in blankets so it wouldn't scratch. Lily wanted to come, but I told her to stay with Susan. This might be weird, kiddo. I'll be back soon. I drove to the police station, parking right out front under the big blue sign. It was a sunny day, birds chirping, nothing weird about it. I got out, leaned against my car, and waited. About 5 minutes later, this compact Honda pulled up. Out stepped Zachary. Behind him was his boyfriend and 2 other guys who looked like they were dragged along for the ride. One was fidgeting with his phone, the other scanning the area like a Secret Service agent. Zachary spotted me and froze. "That's her," I heard him whisper to his boyfriend. "Yeah. Hi, Olivia." "TV's in the back." He didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed. "Yeah, officer. This is Zachary from earlier. Can you come out? We're doing the Craigslist thing." I bit my lip to keep from laughing. A cop sauntered out looking bored. "You the buyer?" he asked Zachary. "Yes, sir. Just want to make sure everything's legit." The cop glanced at me, and then back at them. "Ma'am?" He nodded. I smiled. "Hey." Zachary and his crew approached slowly, like I was a bomb about to go off. Show me the TV first," Zachary said, his voice shaky. "Sure." I popped the trunk. They all peered in, inspecting it like it was evidence. "Looks good," his boyfriend muttered. The 2 friends nodded, one whispering, "She seems normal." "Plug it in?" Zachary asked. "Here? In the parking lot? There's no outlet, dude." The cop chuckled. "Son, if you're this worried, maybe skip Craigslist altogether. eBay's got buyer protection." Just being careful. You hear stories. "Yeah, I do, but she's got a kid's car seat in there. Doesn't look like a murderer to me." I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Look, Zachary, I'm not here to scam or hurt anyone. I'm just a mom selling a TV. If you don't want it, no hard feelings." He sighed, glancing at his boyfriend. They both held hands. "Oh, okay, fine. Let's do this." He pulled out his wallet, counted out $200 in 20s, and handed it over under the cop's watchful eye. The officer even joked, "Want me to notarize it?" We all laughed awkwardly. Then came the transfer. I helped lift the TV out. It was heavy, but manageable. They tried to Tetris it into the car's trunk. No dice. Then the back seat. Still no. The 4 of them were crammed in like sardines already, and the TV was too bulky. It won't fit. I offered, "I can follow you guys home and drop it off." Zachary shook his head vigorously. "No! I mean, thanks, but no." In the end, they called an Uber for the TV. Yeah, seriously, an Uber XL just for the screen. The driver pulled up, confused as hell. "You want me to transport a TV?" "Long story," Zachary mumbled, tipping him extra. As they piled back into the Honda, the cop turned to me. You handled that well, ma'am. Some people are just extra. Thanks, I said. Makes for a good story, at least.
I'm a bartender by trade, and so I've had my fair share of these weird run-ins. You get pretty good at reading people. Who's there to unwind, who's there to disappear, who's there to be seen. Showboats, that kind of people. I've had a solid run at that place. A few years in, good tips, no drama. Management trust me to close most nights. Not a bad gig. The guy in this story came in on a Tuesday. He sat 2 stools down from the service well, ordered a whiskey neat like a true lone wolf. He was around my age, clean and put together, not flashy, not sloppy, very, very normal. And that's the word that stuck with me. He watched me work and wasn't subtle about it. First round turned into 3, and somewhere between them he starts talking. Nothing wild, but it was all personal. Asked if I liked dancing, if I ever got out of the bar after my shifts. Told me I looked like I should be somewhere safer, somewhere brighter. I laughed it off and kept moving. This is what all bartenders do. We've heard it all before. And when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime, I told him politely no, and that was that. He came back the next day. Same seat, same drink. This time he didn't ease into it, picked right up where he left off. I turned him down again, still polite though. He came back again, and again. 5 nights a week easy, sometimes more. He'd show up early, sometimes right before close. Always alone, always that same horny energy. He wasn't pushy exactly, never raised his voice, never got angry when I said no, but he didn't really hear it either. Just nodded, smiled, and circled back around for the next time. Textbook hound dog. Over the next few weeks, he started dropping details. Said he had a daughter, said he was divorced. Talked about work in this vague way, almost like he didn't have a job. But he always paid his tab. There was enough to build a picture, but not much else. I started to expect him, the part that I didn't like admitting, not in a good way, just that he became part of my work shift, a fixture, like the neon sign in the window or the cracked tile behind the bar, stuff you hardly notice until it isn't there. I kept saying no anyway, despite liking the attention. Then, one night he came in really worn out. Bad shift the night before, slept like garbage, everything felt like 3 degrees off in my head. He walked in halfway through the rush and took a seat. Gave me that same look like he'd been waiting all day to see me. He starts in again, dancing, dinner, something fun. He was turning it up to 11. I was weak enough internally that this was starting to work on me. Maybe I was tired of being bored. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that he was harmless. When he asked again, I didn't shut it down. I just said, "Yeah, lunch. Let's do it after my work week is over." 3 days later, we met up. I picked the place. Busy, public, a little noisy, safe. He showed up on time, clean shirt, easy smile, that same confidence that it carried into my bar. Nothing felt off. We ordered sandwiches, iced tea, and sat across from one another like civilized people. And it was fine. The restaurant was one that I knew of but hadn't actually been to. I was disappointed in the menu, but more than that, the food and service itself was very meh. I know that isn't important in my story, but in my head, it felt like it took away from what could have been a nicer date. This kept me on the hook longer than I intended to be. There's no obvious red flags. He asked me about my day, told me the same stories that he'd been telling me for weeks now, about his divorce, his daughter, how hard it was to date now. A little self-centered and a little rehearsed, but not alarming. Just a guy who seemed to like to hear himself talk. I tried to meet him halfway. It was a good conversation, all things considered. When we finished eating, I expected we'd split. Instead, he said, "There's an ice cream place 1 street over. You want to talk more?" That sounded harmless. It was warm out. People were everywhere, so I said sure. We walked and talked. He pointed out shops, so he knew the area well. The ice cream place was small. I'd never heard of it. We sat outside with our cones and really relaxed. Things actually felt good. Then he says, "Well, there's a park right down the road. You ever been to it?" I had. It was a big open space with trails all over. "We could go for a walk for a bit if you want." I hesitated and he noticed. "It's broad daylight. he said, smiling. That line did it. Made me feel silly for second guessing, so I got in his truck. The park was only a few minutes away. He parked near the trailhead, further from the playground. A few cars around, but not many. People scattered across the grass. We got out and he locked the truck. That little chirp, for some reason, just echoed in my mind. We started down the path, and for a minute, it was the same conversation, and I almost regretted going out there, but the trail curved, the trees closed in, and the park behind us quickly faded. Fewer voices, less movement. Just the two of us. And I got a bad feeling in my stomach. I glanced back toward the parking lot. Not a soul in sight. What? He said. I'm just making sure I know where we are. He laughed and kept walking. We took another turn deeper into the trees, and he changed. No build-up, no warning. You're a dumb bitch for coming out here dressed like that, he said. I stopped. What? You heard me. I laughed uncomfortably. Okay, that's not funny. It's not supposed to be. You're being rude. He scoffed. Everything in me went cold, and he stepped closer, right in my face. You got in my truck, he said. Walked into the woods with me, dressed like that. I looked down without thinking. A skirt, a fitted top, pretty casual. He kept going. No one knows where you are. You don't know who I am. How many hours would it take for somebody to figure out that you're missing? I know your name. I know who you are. He smiled. No, you don't. That's when it clicked. This wasn't random. He'd been building to this. I've always paid in cash. I've never given you my real name. I turned and started walking back the way we came, and he stayed beside me without any effort. Where are you going? He said. That's nowhere to go. I didn't answer. My chest was about to explode. My hands were shaking. I kept expecting him to grab me or something. You think you're safe behind that bar? He said. You're just some girl who got in my truck. Every step I took felt like it was going to be my last. No part of this park was familiar to me. I could do anything I wanted out here. You're my property. My legs felt weak. I didn't know what would make him stop talking. Then I said the only thing that I could think of. I hope nobody ever does this to your daughter. He stopped. I took 2 more steps before I realized he was no longer next to me. I turned, expecting him to snap, but he just stood there, face blank. He let out this weird huff, and it sounded like a laugh or a grunt maybe. Keep walking, he said. I didn't argue. We made it back to the truck without another word. My hands were shaking so bad that I fumbled my door. He watched but didn't help. The drive back was quiet. He stopped at lights, signaled, kept his eye on the road. No evidence of the threats of murder that he just made to me. When he pulled up near my car, he unlocked the doors and said, You need to be more careful. I actually did you a favor today. I couldn't even look at him. Yeah, thanks, I said. I actually thanked this smug bastard, I know. I got out, walked to my car, and locked the doors, and lost it as soon as I was inside. Couldn't even get the key into the ignition at first. I called my sister, then my friend, then my mom, told them about what happened, or as much as I could get out. I never reported it. I don't know his real name. I don't know where he lived, and I'd gone willingly, got in his truck, walked into that park. That was the whole point, I think, too. He made sure that I blamed myself, and in a weird way, he did open my eyes up to how vulnerable that I was in the moment, and how I'll never put myself in that situation again. This all happened in 2022, and he never came back to the bar. Years ago, I worked at a dollar store for about 3 months. It was one of those jobs that sounds simple until you're in it 8 hours a day, dealing with people that are teetering on insane and others just straight up criminals. I got screamed at by Karens over coupons, hit on by sketchy guys, and cleaned up messes composed of things that you can't even imagine. But I'd just been laid off, the money was tight, and I needed something to get by, so I stuck with it. I think the only upside was the location itself. Only 3 blocks from my apartment, straight shot down a dim street past a laundromat and a liquor store. My coworkers were decent. Our manager, Lisa, was in her 30s, always tired, always trying to hold the place together. We closed at 11 p.m., and by 10:15 it would usually go quiet. That night felt really normal. It was a dead store, light buzzing, me at the register just waiting it out. Lisa was in the back finishing her paperwork. The last customer had already left. Then the door slams open. A guy rushes in out of breath and eyes wide. Not drunk or high, he just looked terrified. "You need to lock the doors," he said. "Right now. Call the police." Lisa came out from the back, bracing for another issue. "Sir, what?" "I just passed your alley," he cut in. "There's two guys masked. They're not hanging out. They're about to knock this place down, and one of them has a gun." Oh, shit. Lisa didn't hesitate. She locks the door, flips the sign to closed even though we still had time left. I grabbed the phone, called the police, tried to keep my voice steady while my eyes stayed glued to the windows out front. The police showed up relatively quickly, lights washing over the store as they checked the alley, the side of the building, every place they could find. Nothing though. These men were gone, apparently. The officers then came in and told us they'd stay parked outside until we closed for real this time, just in case. That was a relief, but we were still scared. I'm 5'6", about 150 pounds, and I don't scare easily. I've lived in places where you learn to keep moving and mind your business. I've walked home plenty of times without thinking twice, but that night was different. Armed thugs just a walk away. And not just because of that, but because those guys vanished so fast, they could be anywhere. So I called my boyfriend. He came right away without any questions, and when we finally closed, he was waiting across the street with our dog, a big mutt that looked very intimidating. He walked me home quiet, alert the whole way. We hung out a bit, I told him all the drama, and he said there were all kinds of robberies going on. He went home a little while later, which was a short walk through the neighborhood, and texted me when he got back home. Zero issues. The next morning, I ran into my neighbors downstairs. She looked a little off. "You hear what happened?" she asked me. I shook my head. "There's a bodega around the corner from your store. Cashier got shot, killed, around 11:30. Robbery." Same time, same area. I just nodded, but it hit me in the gut. Those guys in the alley. There was no way it wasn't them. I'd been 30 seconds away from getting shot over $600. If that man hadn't come in when he did, I didn't finish that thought. When I got to work, everything felt surreal. Lisa told me she filed a report and given the police everything. She looked even more drained and sleepless, more than normal, on the verge of a coma. After that, though, it was silence for a bit. No scares, no thugs in the alley. It was peace for 48 hours. We were still closing up a little earlier, pretty much right after the last customer around 10 p.m. A couple of days later, Lisa got called into the office, and when she came back, I knew something was wrong. "They wrote me up," she said. "For what?" "Closing early. Doors stay unlocked until 11. No exceptions." I stared at her. "Even after what happened?" She nodded. "Even with the police report. They had one complaint about us not being open until our advertised hours. Corporate is pissed." I thought she was going to quit on the spot, but she didn't. She rubbed her face and went back to work. "I've got bills," she said when I pushed. "I can't just walk." And that was that. The next night fell off from the start. Same routine, same slow crawl to closing, but there was tension under everything else. 10:45, still no customers. Lisa stood by the register with the keys in her hand, glancing at the door. I could tell she was thinking about locking it again, but she didn't. "We'll close on time." I didn't argue. I should have, but I didn't. 11. She flipped the sign to close, and for some reason still left the door unlocked. We started counting the register, going through the usual motions, and then the door opened, followed by footsteps, 2 of them. I looked up and felt my stomach drop. Masks. One of them had a gun, and he raised it right up to our faces. "Register," he said. She opened it, hands flying, pulling out bills and setting them on the counter. I could move, couldn't think, just watched Lisa handle the business. One of them glanced at me and quickly lost interest. I must not have looked like a problem. "That's it? There has to be more. These registers have been fucking shit. he screamed. "That's all the cash we have," Lisa said back. "Bullshit. You have to have a safe in the back or something." Lisa shook her head. Then the gun went off. The sound filled the store and Lisa dropped immediately. All the money in her hands went flying. They were gone just as fast. Door opened, then closed with a few $100s in a sack. Lisa lay there, gasping on the ground. I stood there not understanding what I was seeing. I moved around the corner, dropping to my knees, hands shaking as I tried to help her. There was so much blood. I remember screaming, fumbling for my phone, barely even able to talk to the operator. The cops came back and medical was on scene right behind them. We did everything we could, but it was over before it even began. Lisa didn't make it, and those guys, to my knowledge, were never apprehended. I was devastated after this incident and struggled to go back to work for a couple of months, and ended up quitting. I couldn't go back to that store. Back in 2000, I started working nights at a call center set up to what used to be an army base. It sat well outside the city, far enough that you couldn't just walk off the property and find anything resembling normal life. I'm talking about countryside. The place had been decommissioned years before, and most of it was left as is. Low concrete buildings, empty barracks, rusted fences, long stretches of cracked pavement. Eventually, they planned to turn it into a logistics hub, but at the time it was just us, one building lit up in the middle of a dead zone. If you didn't have a car, the company would run a shuttle bus. It came in before each shift and left after like clockwork. Nights were the absolute worst. The last shift would end at 11 p.m., and if you missed that bus, you were stuck out there until morning. Many people relied on this bus to get back to the city after that last shift. Now, the ride in wasn't really that bad. There was still light out, people were talking and joking. It was the ride out that was different. Everybody was tired, quiet, just ready to get home. The road off the base ran straight for a while, then curved past a stretch where the old building still stood. On one side, empty structures, dark windows, doors hanging wide open. On the other, a wide clearing, then a dense wall forest. A lot of people that worked there told stories about that stretch of land, shapes off in the trees, but most of us would ignore it, and I personally didn't believe any of it until one night. It was late summer, still kind of hot. The bus AC wasn't working and the windows were cracked enough to let in some damp jungle air. There were maybe 10 of us on board, the same old faces, a couple of guys from tech, 2 women from billing, and a supervisor who I didn't know very well. The driver was an older guy who'd been running that route forever, literally the only night driver that I'd ever seen. We pulled out at 11, right on the dot. And the first part of that ride was normal, routine. Silence, the growl of the engine. A few people had already had their eyes closed. I was sitting on the left side, halfway down the tube, watching the buildings pass on my left side. When we hit that empty stretch, the bus slowed down a little like usual. I looked across the aisle, out on the right side toward the clearing, before the trees came up. At first, I thought maybe I was just tired or a shadow from a tree, until it separated itself from the others and started dashing through the dark. It broke out from the forest with this long leap, then running into a full sprint. It was low, but not on all fours. It crossed the clearing in seconds, straight toward the road. There were no animals that I knew of out here with 2 legs that could do that. Somebody near the front made this sound, and I think they were looking out the window too. The driver didn't react though, just kept the bus steady. The thing hit the edge of the road and then matched our speed almost instantly, and most of us started to look now. Then the headlights caught it. I still can't tell you exactly what I saw. It moved insanely fast. The light was catching it in pieces, but it was tall. Its arms were hanging to the ground, almost dragging in the dirt. Its head was angled forward, trying to keep its balance. It turned toward the bus, then it was right there, on top of us, running alongside just outside the window. The first hit rattled the glass, a full body slam. Then again, and again. Heavy blows against the metal between the windows, each one shaking the frame. If it hit the glass, it would have shattered on impact. Everybody was watching now. Somebody in the back started yelling, and one of the women ducked down. Everybody else was pressed up against the left side of the bus, staring out the opposite window. I couldn't look away. It kept pace with us without effort. Every few seconds, it would lunge sideways, hit the bus again, and that impact had zero effect on the creature itself. The driver finally pressed down on the gas and the engine whined, and the bus picked up speed. We were screaming for him to go, 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 and he kept asking us what was happening, but there was no way to explain it to him. We said that something was attacking the bus and he needed to just go. Either way, the thing stayed with us. For a moment, it actually pulled ahead into the front of the headlights. I got a little bit of a clearer look then. Its face, or whatever passed for one, was flat, pale, but not like skin, more like membrane. No real features, just dark spaces where eyes should have been and a slit where a mouth might have been. It wasn't even looking at the road. It was looking at us. It then dropped back and slammed into the side of the front wheel, hard enough to shutter the whole bus. The driver had seen it clearly and went sheet white in his seat. But still, he had the forethought to hit the gas. We were going way too fast for that road, bouncing over the dips and potholes. The thing kept pace with us for a few more seconds, then it veered off, just turned and sprinted back into the clearing, disappearing into the dark, the same way it came. The banging then stopped, and all was left was the engine and a bus full of people on the verge of tears. The hell was that? What have we just seen out here? Everybody tried to make sense of it, but nobody had a good theory. The driver didn't look back, but had no interest in investigating anything further. He just kept going until the buildings were gone and the road opened up toward the city. When we finally hit streetlights, all of us breathed a sigh of relief. I got off my stop and went straight home. I didn't sleep because how could I? The next night, the bus still ran at 11, and for the first time ever, there was a different driver now. No one missed it, but no one sat on the right side either. Nobody sat near a window at all. Our managers told us there would be a security patrol now, somebody to keep the road monitored while people commuted. It was better than nothing, I guess. I never saw that thing again, but apparently others have. And they all seem to have a very similar story as mine.
I'm in the Netherlands on a work trip, and in the evening, I find myself alone in a hotel with nothing to do. Like any self-respecting gay man, reading or watching TV seems like pretty unedifying pastimes when you've got free time. So why not compulsively throw myself onto Grindr for hours and maybe risk my life meeting some weirdo? I started chatting with this cute, nice young guy. He lives fairly far from my hotel, so we decided to meet halfway to get to know each other. 5 kilometers on foot, which I happily do because I like walking around new cities. Not knowing the local geography, I imagine pubs and bars, and instead I find myself in a rather lonely, gloomy part of town. We meet and he's actually much better looking than in the photos. But if on chat he was friendly and nice, in person he seems pretty reserved and unsociable, which I chalk up to Dutch stiffness. I talk to him and he replies in monosyllables with no engagement whatsoever. The emotional and physical affective deprivation my parents raised me with has produced me, an insecure egocentric who has to be liked by the other person at any cost. If he likes me, my unconscious suggests I'll heal my narcissistic wound and finally be worthy of my mom's love. I perform my personal mating dance. He's sufficiently smitten. Out of nowhere, he invites me to his place, and I accept. We get to his place, another 5 kilometers away, right in the countryside, and my phone stops getting a signal. I don't know if it's a lack of coverage or if I just ran out of credit. The house is nothing like I imagined. It looks like the house of an old lady who collects doilies. He tells me the villa we're in was actually inherited from his grandmother, and he's been living there alone for several years. He shows me what he's cooking in the kitchen, a nauseating watery stew that I hope he won't offer me. He takes me into the living room. We sit on the couch and he loosens up a bit. Between one chat and another, he tells me he's a fashion designer and that he produces the fabrics he uses himself with the help of a 3D printer, a super innovative technique. I tell him I know a Dutch designer who uses the same technique. Her name is Iris van Herpen. Pause. He starts foaming at the mouth. He begins telling me that this very Van Herpen stole his ideas and he wants to sue her. He pulls out DVDs of his fashion shows and comments on every single piece, meanwhile showing me YouTube videos of the established designer's shows with the supposed copies of his work. If Van Herpen's models look like ethereal, graceful works of art walking down the runway, His models wearing his creations look like runaway girls on the third walk of shame of the week. I don't tell him this, and on the contrary, I nod along sympathetically to his megalomaniac statements. As I resign myself to the idea that nothing's going to happen, he kisses me. One of the worst kisses of my life, surely a harbinger of far worse performances. I try to guide him and improve things, but nothing. He just can't do it. Like your grandpa when you try to teach him how to use email. He stops and he tells me he'll be right back. He goes upstairs to the second floor. 10 minutes go by and he's still nowhere to be seen. I approach and shout, "Hey, everything okay?" "Yes, of course," he says. Could it be that he wants me to go upstairs and I'll find him naked, bent over? I ask him, "So, should I come up?" To which he just says, No, wait." I wait. Another 20 minutes pass. Is he taking a shower? Yet I don't hear any water running. After a while, much darker possible scenarios start to crowd in. Ones anyone with a bit of common sense would think of if they found themselves in an isolated stranger's house. Is he putting on a raincoat to protect himself from the blood once he chops me up? Is he sharpening an awl with which to carve red rum into my belly after chaining me to the fireplace? I decided to make a run for it. If the idea of being murdered by a stranger has just barely surfaced, the doubt turns into certainty when I realize that the door we came in through is locked. Oh my God, I'm going to die. I go to the kitchen where there's another door, and that one's locked too. Oh crap. I go back to the living room and meanwhile scan the place for possible escape routes. In a dramatic flash forward, I picture myself throwing an armchair through a window and then jumping out and running away, or finding a flashlight in the bookcase to send Morse code distress signals. After about 50 minutes, he comes back downstairs impassive. "I want to have sex with you," he adds without any emotion. I've completely lost the desire. I'm genuinely convinced he's going to kill me. I tell him that I have to go home and that it's late. He replies that I can't go home now. He wants to fuck. I tell him he took too long and that I have to go back to my hotel, which is 10 kilometers away, and it's pitch dark by now. He sighs. I ask him to let me connect to his Wi-Fi since my phone has no signal so I can follow the route on Google Maps. He points to a modem blinking under a chair. The password's underneath. I crouch down to look for the password on the sticker on the back of the modem. After a few seconds, I realized I'm bent over with him behind me. While trying to type the password, I keep glancing at him as he watches me slyly from the couch. My hands are shaking. At a certain point, I see him lean forward from the couch to grab something behind a piece of furniture, an object I can't see, and that I decide it must be a weapon to knock me out. I jump up, grab a lamp, brandishing it, then telling him, "Let me out of here." He looks at me surprised. "If you want to go, go." I tell him that the door's locked. He looks astonished at this statement. "Follow me," he says. I'm now certain I'm going to die. I keep the lamp with me. He looks at me impassively, as if this were practically normal. I follow him and we go into the kitchen where the nauseating stew reigns supreme, and he tells me the keys are there. The light in the room is off. He walks in without turning it on and opens a drawer, and I clearly hear the clinking of cutlery. Oh my God. He wants to attack me with a kitchen knife. I suddenly turn on the light and keep brandishing the lamp. He looks at me coldly and takes the keys from the cutlery drawer. We head toward the door, and as soon as I'm outside, I run like hell, all while the lamp is still in my hand. It takes me 2 hours to get back to the hotel. As soon as I enter my room, I open my laptop, and since his first and last name were visible in the fashion show he tortured me with, I block him on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. Years later, this encounter unsettles me so much that every now and then I Google the city name, fashion designer, and killer, sure that sooner or later he'll kill someone. I'm left with 2 questions. What did he do alone on the second floor for 50 minutes? Was he actually preparing the post-coital crime scene? Did he take Viagra and wait for it to kick in? What was he trying to grab from behind the piece of furniture? A weapon? A portable Wi-Fi hotspot for my dead phone? A dildo? Unfortunately, I don't think I'll ever know. Back in late 2023, I began seeing a man in my neighborhood walking his dog. I would see him in the morning when I went to work, maybe 2 to 3 times a week. He's an average-looking guy, maybe in his 60s. I would see him again regularly when I came home. Since I worked an 8 to 5, I didn't think much of it, just assumed we had similar schedules. He always wore the same blue jacket. I didn't think much of it because it looked like a rain or wind jacket, so I thought it was just what he threw on to walk the dog. He would stare a lot when he walked by, but again, assumed maybe he was just a lonely guy and didn't think too much of it. One day I asked him if he had got the end of the year letter from the HOA, and he seemed confused. I repeated myself, and he said that he hadn't received anything yet. Wrote this off as well because I assumed that he was just caught off guard. I had been seeing him daily for months, but we never spoke. He genuinely seemed shocked by me speaking to him. I told him to keep a lookout for it, and he just stared and went back to walking his golden retriever. I began seeing him even more after this. By Christmas, I was seeing him at least once a day, if not twice. I treated him like every other neighbor, and did a quick neighbor wave whenever I saw him walking his dog. In March, I had separated from my husband. He moved out and took the dog. He owned him before I came along, so I understood this. Since I was now alone and sad, my mom stayed with me for a while. She doesn't work, so she would be at my house during the day while I was gone. She noted the same guy always walking by. She noticed that he always stared too, and it was kind of odd. She waved hello to him a few times, but he never did anything but just stare and walk his dog. She said since he walked the dog often, but also seemingly on a schedule, he could have early onset dementia, or maybe he was sick somehow and using the dog walks as a way to get exercise. We both agreed he was very odd but harmless. After a month or so, my mom went back to her house and I was living alone. One thing I loved about that house was the fact that the backyard butted up to a national park. Beyond my fence was trees and forest. After my husband and dog left, I would be sitting in the backyard and hear what sounded like footsteps. It was almost always late at night when I'd be sneaking out for a late night cigarette before bed. I was drinking a good amount at the time, so I figured 1, I was paranoid, and 2, I was probably hearing raccoons or opossums in the woods, and 3, having the dog before would have scared off any critters. It didn't happen every night, far enough apart that I was able to write it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My fence had horizontal planks rather than your more standard vertical style. There were gaps you could see through if you were right on it. I looked over the fence in the daylight for a sign of anyone back there. The National Forest kept the fire break cleared between the edge of the park and the back of the homeowner's property, so it was difficult to tell if anyone had been there or not. I'd started noticing lighters and cigarettes missing from the backyard. I would swear I had an almost full pack going to bed, but when I'd check the next day, it would be half empty. I wrote this all off due to my heavy drinking. My cousin started coming over and helping me do some handiwork around the house on the weekends. The neighbor guy in the blue coat would walk his dog every day still. He would now stop and watch my cousins from the sidewalk as they did work at the house. He would let the leash out for the dog to come up to them, but they didn't pet it because it smelled awful. I told them the theory my mom said that he was sick and weird, but harmless. They didn't agree, and the next time he let the dog into the driveway, my cousins had told him to screw off. From what they told me, he just stared at them for a while, then walked off. From then, the man would still stare, but it was even creepier now. When I would drive by, he would stop and watch me, as in physically turning his body to follow my car as I went by. I would always wave as if it were any other neighbor, as I always did, and he didn't flinch. Around June, a friend of mine moved in. She was going through a divorce as well, and I was happy to have someone to hang out with after work. We had a lot of fun drinking and burning fires in the fire pit. And it began again. The sound of footsteps in the woods. We were both drunk, so we ran inside and just laughed it off. This happened a handful of times over the next few months. I would hear things more often when I was alone. My roommate split her time, so she was never with me on the weekend. She had noted the creepy guy with his dog. He seemed to be walking his dog when I left for work, around 7:30, and again when she was leaving for work, around 8:30. He would let his dog out to her daily, and she would pet the dog at first. She stopped because the dog smelled so bad and the man never spoke. He just stared. She started being creeped out too. She said he seemed friendly enough until she stopped petting his dog and his stare shifted to being mean too. He began stopping to watch her drive by as well. Then one day I saw it. I saw him down out past the entrance of the neighborhood and at the tree line to the forest. He was clearly walking into the woods. That's when it clicked. Why did he wear the same clothes every day? Why he seemed to be there with his dog every day we left the house? Why did they smell so bad? Why I was hearing things in the woods? I almost began to panic. Surely a man isn't living in the woods watching me, right? Surely this man hasn't been watching me through my fence for almost a year at this point. The whole time this was happening, the house next door was empty. It was a rental and the previous tenants left and it sat. I started thinking back and I began seeing the man sometime after the previous tenants moved out. I tried my best not to panic and started looking into trail cameras to film behind my fence. I told my roommate about my theory and she said I sounded crazy at first. She jokingly started yelling out for him to go away and leave us alone. Then we finally started hearing footsteps in the woods at that moment and then ran inside. Before I could even order a camera, they had rented the house next door. It was just days after I told my roommate what was going on. A family with a dog and 2 kids had moved in. The last time I saw the man walking his dog was the morning the family moved in because I came home from work to see the moving truck. When I introduced myself to the neighbors, I had asked about the woods behind the house. They didn't have a fence. I asked if they found anything back there, and they said they did, but it was just random junk they threw out. I didn't say anything more. I really contemplated telling them, but I figured I would sound insane. I believe this man was living behind their house and watching me through my fence. I never had cameras in the backyard, so I can't say for certain if he ever crossed the fence. Since I never saw him again, I decided that his cover was blown and he had moved on to watch other people. I stayed in that home until October 2025. Literally never saw that guy ever again after that day. This is quite a long one, so apologies that it may take a while to tell. I do have to give a little bit of context also. I'm a 22-year-old female, but the story took place when I was 21. I live in a small town and I work in a pub in the town center. 2 pubs, 2 small shops, and a bank. On my walk home, I walk past one of the shops which also has a small bus shelter next to it. Buses run every hour-ish, but none run after 8 p.m. After that, it's just residential housing and then my house near the end of the road. All in all, from my job and house, it's about an 8-minute walk. My town is usually dead after 10 p.m. as everything is closed, and I would genuinely say it was relatively safe. I never had a problem with walking home alone. This incident happened on New Year's Eve going into New Year's Day, so the pubs were open later. I finished my shift at about 1:30 a.m., and me, my boss, boyfriend, and 2 other coworkers went to the pub next door for a drink before we went home. It was about 2:30 a.m. when I realized what time it was and that I needed to get home. My boyfriend lives on the other side of town and I wasn't staying with him that night. My boss insisted on driving me home, and I kept insisting that he stay as everyone else was enjoying themselves and talking about the Christmas period we had at work. Same with my boyfriend. He insisted on walking me home, but I was adamant that I was fine, and it's literally less than 10 minutes. Anyway, after a lot of pushback, I told them I was walking home. I really enjoy walking without headphones, having a cigarette, especially after a shift because it genuinely is so silent and peaceful. I didn't pass or see anybody until I got to walking past the shop. Like I mentioned previously, there's a small bus shelter next to it, and as I got closer, I realized there was a man sitting on the bench in the bus stop. Bear in mind, it is nearly 3 a.m., and even the pub we were at wasn't actually open anymore. They just let us in because we worked at the other pub. I didn't really think much of the man, but as I got closer, I realized I had served him at my shift earlier on in the night. He looked up as I was walking, and I realized he was sniffing some sort of drug from his keys, most likely cocaine. I didn't actually know who he was, and still don't, but he didn't seem threatening. He just looked like he was kind of chilling, I guess. Probably not the best choice of words. He did meet my eyes though, and I was actually walking past the bus shelter. He said something along the lines of, "Sorry, darling, do you have a lighter I can borrow?" I was smoking as I was walking, so he knew I would have one. I stopped and he was already walking towards me as I had, so I started digging one of the many lighters that I had out of my bag. I was fully intent on just letting him keep it. I'm not the type to stand with a 30-something-year-old man while he's lighting a cigarette. Then he had asked me for a cigarette, but I had just lit my last one, which I said. During this whole conversation, he was very close to me, but I was kind of frozen in place. I'd realized that I'd stopped and was standing with a man in a dead street where nobody was around. I was still in the part of town where there isn't housing for another couple of minutes, and if anyone had come out of the pub, I was too far away where they wouldn't have seen me. I just started mumbling something like, "Hey, just keep the lighter. I've got to go." But this man who I had only spoken to for about 20 seconds told me, "Wait, just stop a second." And when my feet had started to turn to walk away, I stopped again. Side note, I know I should have just walked away, but I thought maybe it was innocent enough, and I didn't want to give a reason to provoke him if I had just walked away from him. This time his demeanor switched, and he wasn't very polite to start with, but it's like him telling me to stop made him realize that I was a young woman walking alone at this time of night. I genuinely still get chills thinking about what he said. He looked me up and down, then he said, "You know, I've been real angry, and I've been waiting for someone to hurt all night. You shouldn't be walking around here alone." My legs literally turned to jelly at that moment. I didn't even know if my phone was in my pocket or in my bag. I looked around and then said, "I'm not alone. My boyfriend is waiting for me around the corner. I will be with him in a minute." Then smiled. Just a bare-faced lie. My boyfriend was still in the pub and had no clue that this interaction was going on. I thought maybe I should walk back and go back to the pub, but I just decided not to. My house is closer. The man smirked as if he knew I was chatting absolute bullshit, and he would walk with me to meet my boyfriend. There was no boyfriend waiting for me around the corner. I kept saying there was no need, but he was literally on my tail, rambling about how I don't understand him, I don't get it, I need to walk with him, that he wasn't going to hurt me. And this whole time I kept thinking he was going to grab my hair or pull me to the ground, and that any minute he was going to realize there was no boyfriend waiting for me. I ended up pulling my phone out of my pocket, and it opened to our work group chat, and I just typed a message about a man walking with me, realizing my phone was on 2%, thinking that I just wanted someone to know what was happening. I didn't dare go to call my boyfriend. This guy had started mumbling about how I wasn't listening to him. By some miracle, when we turned around the corner onto my street, the guy didn't realize my boyfriend wasn't there, or maybe he did but didn't say anything. He did up his behavior though, and he started spewing the most perverted stuff to me, saying, "You're such a pretty young girl. I bet your boyfriend doesn't know how to handle you." The whole time I wasn't speaking, just speeding up and checking my phone discreetly. I realized that he was going to know where my house was, so I just thought, I'm going to have to pretend one of these houses are mine. Otherwise, I'll be leading him right to my house where my dad would be asleep at the back of the house, none the wiser. All of the houses on the street had a small gate and footpath leading to the door, so I chose a house with the light on and opened their gate. I turned to the guy and then said, "This is my place. See you later. And thanks for walking me." Then closed the gate behind me. I ran up to their door and shoved my key into the door that wasn't mine and prayed that this guy would leave and wouldn't wait for me to go inside the house. Thankfully, he didn't, and he started stumbling in the opposite direction back down the street away from where my actual house was. And what I thought was my only chance, I opened this gate and sprinted home. This guy clocked what I was doing instantly and started walking in my direction. By the time I got to my house, he had either not caught up quick enough or had given up. When I put my key into the door, I realized my dad had left his in the door internally, meaning I was locked out. I got my phone out and realized it had died by the time we were walking, so I just started banging on the door, and luckily, my dad let me in after a couple of minutes. And that was it. But it was absolutely terrifying. I haven't walked home alone since, and my boyfriend was so upset that he didn't push more and let him walk me home. Thankfully, I'm okay, and nothing physical happened to me.
I work at a grocery store that I won't name in Detroit, and I work almost exclusively on the third shift, so thankfully I don't have to deal with customers, and I spend most of my time stacking shelves and doing busy work. It might not sound like a glamorous job, but it's something to earn me a little money while I finish my college degree, which I'm actually set to graduate with honors. Now, it's very, very rare that anything weird happens during the third shift. Some of the workers can be a bit weird, but aren't we all who work at night? No, I'm just projecting, but I usually arrive at the store during closing time, by which all the customers have been tossed out on their butts. I don't know what happened in this particular case. Maybe she was hiding in the bathrooms or tucked away in a display or God knows what. But short version shorter, there was an elderly female customer left in the store with us when it should have been just us workers. Now maybe you'd imagine her wandering around lost or looking for her dead husband or demanding to know where we keep the pasta. Aisle 3, by the way. But no, she snuck through the whole of the store unseen, like solid freaking snake, and none of us had a clue that she was even in the store for the first hour of our shift. Now, the first sign that something was wrong was a sudden foul smell emanating from the fish department. Myself and my colleague Cherry rushed over there, curious as to what had suddenly caused a fish to just go rotten. Had a tuna exploded or something? But nothing could have prepared us for what we saw. The old woman had crawled inside the iced fish display, which was actually due to be emptied by one of us at some point, and she was rolling around inside of it, tearing fish apart with her bare hands and somehow treating them like her worst enemies. We watched in horror and, I guess, kind of amusement. We could only stare as she saw the goddamn octopus sitting there, some kind of delicacy that they'd imported in because God knows why. Apparently people eat these things, and squid. And she was muffled by the glass, but we heard her screaming something like, "There you are," at the octopus, and began trying to tear into it. Now, octopi are stretchy and pretty hard to just tear with your hands, so this old lady had the brilliant idea to just sort of gnaw on the octopus with her teeth. Only it turns out that she wore dentures, and after a number of attempts of biting the octopus's tentacles off, she got her dentures stuck in its forehead. Thankfully, someone had called the cops by now who showed up, but it was like nobody wanted to intervene. We wanted to see what she'd do next, and unfortunately, what that involved was smashing her way out of the glass cabinet housing the fish, creating an even more disgusting smell as she charged towards us. We soon realized that there was more to it than fish. She'd soiled herself. Now, this might all seem funny to you, and frankly, it was right up until this moment. Then, covered in broken glass and bleeding profusely from shards, she lunged at Cherry, tackled her, calling her an octopus woman and accusing her of inserting eels into various orifices, and I think some troll grandson of hers had shown her some of the famous shock memes and it had just broken her brain. And the whole thing ended with the cops having to actually tase her and try to bring her down, but she was having none of it. She somehow withstood the entire taser blast. I guess it was pretty weak since they thought that she was just some old woman. And then she charged back to the fish counter, grabbed as much seafood as she could carry, and then jumped on Cherry again. Now, the next thing we know, she's trying to force an entire octopus down Cherry's throat while whipping me with some eel, and I know it sounds funny as hell, but it was honestly terrifying at the time. The fish were pierced with broken glass, and she was forcing broken glass down Cherry's throat, and she was pierced with broken glass herself, meaning that she was cutting Cherry up. And so here's the final kicker. The old woman wasn't an old woman at all. She was an old man who had made a living as a fisherman and lost his livelihood thanks to commercial fishing and grocery stores like ours switching from locally sourced produce. He had dressed as his wife because after he went bankrupt during the Great Fish Recession, she died of a heart attack, and he blamed just about everyone he could, but mostly us. Apparently our store chain had been his biggest local client, and so it ended up being a tragic and horrifying and scary incident. Cherry suffered severe damage and bleeding to her trachea, as well as some scars all over her body from the broken glass, and the store managed to keep almost all mention of it out of the papers, and the poor psychotic fisherman was taken away to spend his remaining years in psychiatric care. I still work at the grocery store on third shift, but hopefully not for much longer after I graduate. Jerry's doing just fine now, but we all insisted that we were not willing to stock imported octopi in the fish counter from there on in. Word of advice: never work in a gas station at night. This might sound kind of dramatic, but I'd rather crawl over broken glass, work down in the sewers, or be Hassan Piker's dog than work night shift at a gas station again. Maybe day shift is better, but my a-hole boss, who I really want to call a slur but don't want to get you demonetized, forced me to work night shift and night shift only. I was a 22-year-old high school dropout who'd spent 6 months in juvie and bounced from foster family to foster family, so I guess I was lucky enough to find work at all. But good God, I am very sure that it wasn't legal to force a 22-year-old to work 5 night shifts a week every week without ever changing to day shifts. And there were a lot of things about Gary's gash and groceries that weren't strictly legal, but I'm not a rat, and Gary's been buried in the ground for nearly 20 years now. Not to mention the fact that I'm now with his daughter and she has my kid on the way, so I gotta play nice. So I'm not trying to sound like some jerk here, but Lana, Gary's daughter, is the one baiting me to write this right now. I'm actually a very nice guy in my personal life, and I'm gonna pop the question to Lana before our baby boy is born. You know, what's a better place for a proposal than a freaking Let's Read video? Lana, you make me the happiest I'd ever been, and I can't wait to raise our son with you. Now, through the power of Joel of the Golden Voice, I'm asking, will you marry me? Now, let's quickly move on to the story in case she says no. If she says yes, though, well, this will be the first serious proposal you performed on the channel, and I hope so. Now anyways, the point is, Gary was a greasy, greedy dude, and let's just say that I'm glad Lana inherited certain things from her Catholic mother rather than certain things from her father. But enough about that. We had some absolutely effing weirdos who dropped in during the night shift. There was this one guy who would spend a sickening amount of money on scratch cards, and I don't think he ever won a single cent. And from the way he dressed, he was clearly trailer trash too, and a few times I remember saying, "Buddy, do you think you should cool it with the gambling? I'm genuinely concerned about you." And you know how he responded? He hissed at me. Not even a word, he just hissed. After 3 times that, I just gave up. So there was that scratch-off jack-off, and then there was the 7-foot-tall man who came in at precisely 2 a.m. every day and bought a single Red Bull, a pack of Marlboro Lights, and one of those massive pickles in the plastic packets. Just those 3 items every single time. And the guy looked like he was about 90 as well, and sure, he was a skinny mofo, but there was absolutely no way that I was questioning him on his purchases, especially not after the hissing gambler. Now finally we had this kid, and he looked about maybe 8 tops, who would come in at around 5 in the morning every single Tuesday and Thursday, and would ask if we had any X-Men trading cards for sale. And I explained to him every single time that we didn't sell trading cards of any kind, but that didn't put him off. He'd be there every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, and when I told him no, he looked so upset and despondent, really. And so one day I went to the local comic shop and just got like 6 little packs of X-Men trading cards. And when the kid came in next, I presented him with the packs because surely one of them was the right brand that he was looking for. And the kid looked at the pack of cards, called me a retard, and then threw the packs back at me and stormed out. Now to this day, I have no idea what I did wrong. The guy in the comic store told me that these were all X-Men trading cards that existed, but I guess I really don't know what I guess, but I never saw the kid again anyway, and that was kind of a relief. And I'm pretty sure that in the future someone met this kid, and he was the inspiration for that Duck song about the lemonade and the grapes, and if you know, you know, Google it. Now speaking of kids and short people, it's time to start the creepiest of these stories. I'm standing at the counter, minding my own business, when I just hear this rich, deep voice demand that I cook him a hot dog because all the ones on the machine are overcooked and look like crap. I glance over and yeah, fair enough. The hot dogs had been on rotation for about 3 days if I knew Gary, so a fresh batch wasn't out of the question. The problem was, I had no idea where the request had come from. The voice demanded that I get a move on and said that he didn't have all day. And so I leaned over the counter, trying to get a better view of the store, and that's when I saw a little person standing as close to the counter as he could get without face planting. Now, I'll admit I was a little thrown that he'd decided to position himself somewhere that would clearly not be visible to me, but whatever. Now, I apologized profusely and said that I had no idea that he was a little person. And the guy just sort of harumphed and huffed and said that calling him a little person was deeply offensive. And so in my infinite wisdom, I apologized again and said, "I'm sorry, I meant midget." And I saw his face go red with fury, and I knew that I messed up. Now, I scoured my mind. What else did small folk like to be called? Now, this was back in the 80s, so the differences weren't as well known then. And the man explained that he had dwarfism, and so obviously I should refer to him as dwarf. Now, fair enough. I have no problem with that, and I will refer to people however they want. I guess the thing that riled me up is that during my first time in juvie, I took an extremely nasty acid attack to the face, and it left me permanently disfigured and blind in one eye, so I clearly wasn't so intentionally ableist against people with different body types, but that's neither here nor there. I told the dwarf that I would happily make him a new hot dog if he'd head over to the machine with me so I could cook the wiener to his perfect perfection. And somehow, of course, this managed to offend the fella tremendously again, and he began screaming at me in what sounded like a Shakespearean monologue about how he shouldn't have to move, and it was my job to go and cook him a hot dog with all the trimmings and blah blah blah. No, actually, it wasn't. It was a self-service hot dog machine, but I wasn't going to argue. I told him that I'd head over and cook him up the best hot dog he'd ever had. Now, the dwarf replied by saying that it was too late now. I'd screwed everything up, and it was time to face the consequences. In complete shock, I watched as the little man rose to his full height of around 6 foot. At the same time, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sawed-off shotgun. He told me that if I went for the panic alarm or anything like that, he'd blast a hole in my chest the size of a foot-long hot dog. And you know what? Screw it. Screw Gary. I wasn't getting killed over a job that barely paid enough for me to live and forced me to work 5 nights a week at Gary's. And I told the now 6-foot dwarf to chill and emptied the register for him. He filled a bag that he'd produced from nowhere and gave me a very cruel smile and just strutted out of the gas station. Or he almost did. For some reason, he paused to unload a shotgun round into the hot dog station and blasting that thing into pieces, leaving my ears ringing, and then he left. Now, my heart was pounding harder than it had when I'd done 4 lines of, well, never mind. Immediately, I pressed the panic button and I called 911 for good measure. Screw Gary. Those cops could actually wake him up. And so when the cops got here, we discovered a bunch of things. 1, Gary was too cheap to actually buy an outdoor security camera, so that one was actually fake. And so we had absolutely no footage of this fake dwarf leaving the premises. However, the interior cameras did work, and I was able to see how he'd tricked me. He'd been kneeling on shoes, positioned in a perfect practiced pose, so I had no chance of seeing his real legs. This explains why he didn't want to accompany me to the hot dog machine, though. And hilariously, this fake dwarf had been the suspect in a bunch of local robberies. He'd never fired his weapon before, and you know what got him caught? The fact that he took the time to shoot the crap out of that hot dog oven. Now, they were able to trace that buckshot of the gun to the owner and get his ass busted. He'd robbed enough places that I'm pretty sure that he'd actually die behind bars. What a shame. And as for me, I got my ass absolutely chewed out by Gary for handing over the cash and not risking my life by grabbing the baseball bat under the counter. I quit on the spot. I got my life together and I went back to school. I graduated, then got a degree, and some years later I met a woman that I fell head over heels for. Now imagine how shocked I was when I discovered that she was Gary's daughter, and hated him even more than I did. We originally bonded over drinks, where she shared our glee that he was dead, and now I know I sound like an ass, but you didn't know the man. He wanted me to die rather than hand over $200 or so to a fake dwarf. Screw Gary, screw the fake dwarf. I work in a very lucrative field now, and my life's freaking awesome. And that's why I'm writing to another awesome person you, let's read, and I hope you enjoyed my story of a bunch of weirdos, at least one of whom nearly murdered me, and if you didn't, well, I know people who will shove a hot dog where the sun don't shine. Have a beautiful day. Hi, Joel. I grew up in Britain, although my parents are French. You'd never know it, though, because I have the most posh, London-sounding accent that a French girl could ever have. This might be because of the school that I went to, or because I left school in college, and I took some time out before university to work as an air hostess. I loved that job and ended up staying in the air for 5 years. Not literally, of course, but you get what I mean. I left sixth form college in 1997, and the story that I'm about to share with you took place in 1999. This was a couple of years before, everything changed with the planes, and security was very different back then. Things were a lot more lax, and it was much easier to get up to high hijinks. For one thing, you could still join the Mile High Club without too much trouble. Not that I ever did that, of course. I honestly would never. I shouldn't joke about that kind of thing, considering the story that I'm about to share with you, or joke about anything, really. So this story took place on the first ever red-eye flight that I was working. I'm sure everyone knows what a red-eye flight is by this point, but if by some small chance you don't, it's a flight, generally a shorter one, that takes place at night and often involves the passengers sleeping for the duration. If you take the red-eye, you're meant to stay quiet, calm, and well-behaved. I can't remember if kids were flat out banned from our red-eye flights, but I don't ever remember any kids or babies on the handful that I worked. Now this was 27 years ago, so bear with me. I've not worked as an air hostess for almost as long, and I haven't thought about planes in a long time. From what I can recall, the plane, run by some long bankrupt airline that you probably never heard of, was divided into 2 sections. The front section, closer to the cockpit, was for passengers who wanted to stay quiet and chill but weren't intending to sleep. It was the cheaper option and usually the busier one. Then the back of the plane, in reverse of the usual, was sort of the first class section, except this was for people who wanted or needed to sleep, so it was filled with bed seats. I was working up front, which suited me just fine because I didn't want to tiptoe around snoring old businessmen. And the sleeping area always smelled like farts too, so that was lovely. A red-eye typically doesn't have as many flight attendants as a regular flight, or at least it didn't back then. I think there were just 3 of us on that flight, although I could be misremembering. What I do remember is that I was up front, obviously, and my dear, queer, gentle friend Adam was working the sleeper section. Do you remember H from Steps? I don't know if Steps was that big in the United States, so maybe you never knew him, Joel, but if not, Google him and stick a picture up on screen if you can. Adam looked just like H from Steps, only he was a lot calmer, quieter, and more gentle than H, who always seemed like he had the energy of 50 men. Now make sure you Google H from Steps and not his real name, Ian Watkins, otherwise you might get that nunce from Lost Prophets, another singer who unfortunately shared a name. Now, he did some really, really terrible things, and you should do a true crime story about him one day, actually. That'd be actually very interesting. He was shanked in prison recently, too. Died. What a tragedy. Now, anyways, Adam was like a really calm and gentle H from Steps, and I promise this is important eventually. Partly it's important because the villain of this story, who we'll call Ian, looked kind of like the Lost Prophets guy. Although he wasn't really famous at the time and we didn't know he was a major criminal, so maybe I'm just misremembering. I'll call him Ian anyway because nearly every guy called Ian I've ever met was a proper prick, if you get me. Except for my cousin Ian, who's an actual right laugh. So anyways, back to the red-eye. Because I was working at the front of the plane, most of the passengers ate late-night airline food, and that meant that it was my job to collect up the trays with their rubbish on them. Now, I did this on autopilot, pun intended, sticking them on my trolley with a little "thank you, sir," or "thank you, ma'am," or "thank you, lovely," if they were some old biddy who was so wrinkled that they could have been a lad or a lass, or how do I put this tactfully? Someone who was very, very large and made it impossible to tell their gender. Now anyways, you had to be really careful about that back then. Christ, I mean, I feel bad for air hostesses in the 2020s. and I bet there had to have been some actual moments where a 20-year-old sweetheart had called a bearded passenger sir and been chewed out for not recognizing that they were a pretty princess. Oh Christ, I shouldn't have had those last couple of glasses of wine before writing you this email. Now anyways, I got my trolley full of trays and crap to the center of the plane and began chucking away the plastic boxes that the dinner had come in. And that's when I noticed it. A napkin with writing scrawled across the whole thing. "I know what you did on that plane," they'd written. And then a crude picture of what was definitely supposed to be me because, well, I could just tell, okay? Now, there had only been about 7 or 8 passengers who'd had dinner, so the note couldn't have come from too many people. I don't know why I even cared, because I hadn't done anything on any plane by that point, but the drawing had been very rude and insulting, and I was young, so I guess I felt kind of threatened by it. It didn't take long for me to notice Ian, even in the low, dim lights of the red-eye flight. Now, he was a guy about my age with slicked back hair and a goatee that made him look like a proper wrong'un. Now, he kept giving me the evils, looking at me like I was a bit of dog poo on the sole of his shoe, but then also sometimes like he wanted to lick it. Now, I'm going to stop this comparison there because I'm squeaking myself out, but you get the idea. I was disgusted by him, but he still wanted a piece of that, you know? And so I guess he was watching when I was looking, and he saw me looking, and then he started calling me over and asking for things like, "Hey girl, gonna get a bottle of water?" Or, "Got any napkins? I seem to have lost mine." And my favorite, "Way up, whoa lass, can you handle these nuts for me? I haven't had any complimentary airline peanuts yet. So, can you get them?" And that's what he said, word for word, and I swear on the Bible about it. As an air hostess back then, at the dodgy flight company I worked for, you were taught to always smile, be as flirty as possible, and take as much crap from passengers as you could tolerate. I remember once, before this red-eye, I got chewed out for telling a passenger off after he touched my butt, and he said it was an accident and apologized, so apparently I was in the wrong for muttering perv under my breath as I walked off. Now anyway, after I gave Ian his nuts, he called me back again about 10 minutes later and said that they really were salty, and then he asked me if I liked salty things, which I pointedly ignored. And so he just laughed and said he needed another bottle of water and asked if I could be a good girl and go fetch him one. Of course, I did just that. What I didn't realize was that Ian got right out of his seat and followed me into the middle of the plane, where we kept things like bottled water and complimentary peanuts. The bathrooms were nearby, so at first I wasn't alarmed by the sensation that someone had followed me. Unfortunately, it was Ian, and he wasn't headed to the bathroom. Instead, he grabbed me, pinned me against the wall, and shoved some kind of hand towel against my mouth to gag me. And then he leaned in close and started whispering in my ear about what a terrible person I was. He didn't say it exactly like that, obviously. He said some proper vile stuff. Stuff that now, as a grandmother in my early 50s, I'd give a lad a good lick in the dick for. But back then, though, I was just a little wee thing and I was terrified. I started crying almost immediately, and Ian was all cruel and callous, saying that I brought this on myself, and he said I'd betrayed him after what I did on the last flight, and asked how I was okay with throwing away 7 years of our relationship. And that's when I realized that this guy somehow believed that I was someone totally different, specifically his girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, who was also apparently an air hostess and had cheated on him on a flight. I didn't know it at the time, but his brain was absolutely fried from a cocktail of alcohol, MDMA, and coke, which I guess explains his temporary insanity. And things escalated when he tried to force me into the bathroom, pushing the hand towel so deep into my throat that I couldn't even try to scream. None of the passengers were turning around, and it was just me and Ian and a curtain separating us from the sleeper section. Now, the best I managed was slapping the wall, trying to do some type of SOS. I got maybe 2 short slaps in before Ian grabbed me between the legs over my skirt and squeezed in a way that made it very clear that he'd do worse if I kept going. I guess my beloved friend H heard the slapping because suddenly I saw all 5'5" of him peeking through the curtain, and then holy God, he stormed toward Ian, and then holy God, he yanked him off of me. My gentle, sweet buddy H didn't hesitate. He smashed his forehead into Ian's face, and the crunch of a bone sounded like a gunshot in that silent plain. And then H was yelling that a man was trying to assault his colleague, and H absolutely bodied him. It turned out he was a brown belt in Krav Maga. He floored Ian in seconds, tied him up with plastic ties, and even broke bones in his foot when Ian tried to kick out. Ian spent the next 3 hours hog-tied in an out-of-order bathroom next to a toilet full of poop. We radioed ahead, and police were waiting at Heathrow. This Ian guy was arrested immediately, and after that, things changed. I became more cautious, I went to therapy eventually, and I gained a whole new respect for H. I stayed in the job for another 3 years and then left, and life moved on. But I'll never forget the terror of that night, or the man who saved me.
In your last video, you had a story that took place in Peru, and it reminded me of my experience in the neighboring country of Ecuador. In the early 2000s, I had just gotten my degree, and I was looking to take a vacation before I started job hunting. My idea of a good time is seclusion. To this day, I'm an avid hiker who enjoys traveling to remote locations in the United States, Canada, and South America. A friend of mine suggested that Ecuador had some scenic hiking trails and that tourism there is extremely low because of the country's severe instability. I never minded a little danger, and the less tourists, the better. They always ruin the atmosphere for me. Despite how Caucasian sounding my name is, I'm actually half Mexican on my mother's side, and I speak fluent Spanish. The point being, I could blend in easily. A day after landing in Guayaquil, I was deep in the Cerro Blanco forest, miles from anywhere. The canopy was so thick, it felt like evening time, despite it being in the middle of the day. I came to this location specifically to capture a photo of what they call the cloud forest, where trees become shrouded by low-hanging clouds, which creates a sort of localized fog area. But during my hike, I came across something very out of place. A white box truck, parked right in the middle of the forest. There was no road, no clearing, just trees all around it. I thought maybe the truck had broken down and was abandoned, but the truck looked like it was in good shape. I found it odd, but I wasn't looking for trouble, so I kept moving. That's when the first arrow flew right past my head, missing me by inches. Before I could even process what was happening, another arrow struck me in the shoulder. The pain was instant and burning. I ran as more arrows were shot in my direction. I came upon an area of tall bushes and dropped to the ground behind one of them, trying to make myself as small as possible. While I was hiding there, bleeding and trying not to make a sound, I saw a camouflaged figure emerge from the trees about 30 yards away, holding a crossbow. He moved slowly, scanning the area. He was clearly hunting for me. After what felt like forever, he finally disappeared back into the foliage. I soon heard the box truck start up and drive away. I stayed hidden for another 30 minutes. I knew not to remove the arrow, but I was still losing blood, and I had to get moving. I made my way back toward the parking area as fast as I could. When I finally reached the lot, I was exhausted and collapsed. Fortunately for me, several bystanders were there to help me. The police were called, and I was rushed to a hospital. A detective later came to speak with me when I was feeling better. He told me the box truck I saw was almost certainly being used by drug traffickers. The deep canopy of the Ecuadorian forests made perfect mobile staging points for moving narcotics. The man who shot me was probably guarding that shipment. It was in a remote location, but since it was near a hiking trail, the attacker may not have wanted to make too much noise, which is likely why they used a crossbow. I eventually made a full recovery and returned home as soon as I was able to. This happened in 2002. Since then, Ecuador has made a lot of progress and is a much safer place to visit now. but I've never returned there after that. There were a few articles written about what happened to me, but I can't seem to find any of them on Google. Over 20 years have passed, and I still go hiking whenever I can, and I always bring a handgun with me, if where I'm going allows it. It was around 2005 that I had to take a long hiatus, because that's when I met my wife and started a family. It wasn't until around 2018 that I started taking sporadic trips again. There was a while where I'd find myself looking at photos of my wife and kids, and a haunting thought would creep into the back of my mind. If that arrow had just been a few inches more to the left, I never would have met my wife, and my kids would have never been born. I likely would have disappeared forever. I was on my way back home to New Jersey from New York City. I had gone to go see a Knicks game at the Madison Square Garden that night. For full context, I went to a nearby nightclub and did a bit of drinking before heading back. So by the time I left the club, I was feeling a bit inebriated. I was absolutely not going to get behind the wheel of a car at night in the middle of New York City. I made my way to Penn Station and took the train to Times Square, got off, and walked over to the Port Authority bus terminal. Once I got there, I saw that it was empty. Not a single soul in sight. Suddenly, I was pushed from behind, and as soon as I fell to the ground, I felt at least 3 people kicking me while I was down. I curled up into a ball as I was assaulted. I then felt my wallet being taken as I just laid on the ground, completely defenseless. The 3 assailants ran off, and I was left there with no money or identification. Thankfully, my phone had not been taken during the attack. I rapidly pressed the power button 5 times, which connected me to a police operator. I told the dispatch what had just taken place, and they said that they would be sending a car out right away. I was still pretty shaken up about what happened, breathing heavy, and my words were trembling as I spoke. I turned my head to the right to see a knife laying there. It must have fallen out of one of the robbers' pockets as they were kicking me. I'm just glad it wasn't used on me. The police got there in under 5 minutes, along with the EMTs. I was rushed to the hospital, where I told my story to the police. After being treated, I was released the next day. I'm still pretty upset that I lost $300 in cash, along with all my credit cards and driver's license, but my life is more valuable than any of that stuff. I'm still in communication with the investigators assigned to my case. No arrests have been made yet, and I'm not sure if they'll ever be able to track them down. If the police do end up catching them, I'll be 100% pressing charges. This story has become all too familiar within our society, especially in New York City. As a victim who was traumatized and beaten, we should never accept this as normal. People should be allowed to walk down the streets or ride the subway and not have to worry about being attacked or harassed. I hope that by sharing my experience, it'll help others be more aware if they ever plan on visiting the big cities, because this problem is nationwide. My name is Muhammad. I am a practicing Muslim living in New York City. Back in 2015, I was always bullied in middle school for my religion. There were 2 bullies in particular whose names were Frankie and Johnny. They would take things to an extreme, which included assaulting me, chasing me, shoving me into lockers, and they even ganged up on me one time to dunk my head into one of the toilets. Funny enough, I had some friends who would preach about social injustice and Islamophobia in America, but they did not step in when they saw me being bullied. It was approaching the first weekend of December. My parents wanted to go upstate to our countryside house, which was located near the Catskill Mountains. I invited my best friend Jaden to come along with us. We drove out of the city at around 6 p.m. on a Friday night and got to the house around 8:30. After unpacking, we all went to bed. The next morning, Jaden and I wanted to go geocaching since the house was right next to a state forest which had plenty of hiking trails. If you don't know, geocaching is an outdoor activity where you use a GPS device to find hidden containers, kind of like a treasure hunt. Jaden and I have been doing this since the first grade. My parents gave us permission, but we were only allowed to do it for 4 hours. So, we then set off into the forest. An hour and a half passed, and we had already located 4 treasures on our hike. We were now near a waterfall, and the next box was 0.4 miles away from our current location. As we were walking and trying to locate the next geocache, we heard something moving around behind us. We turned around, and what I saw was scarier than any horror film I've watched. Here in this forest, many miles away from the city, I saw the 2 people who were currently making my school life a living hell, Frankie and Johnny. How the hell were they in the same exact place we were in? Did their families secretly have a house up here? Did they follow us? I didn't know how this was even possible. They couldn't have got there by themselves, since they were the same age as Jaden and I. Once I saw them, I blurted out, "What the heck are you 2 doing here? How did you guys even find us? You thought by coming out here you were safe from us? I don't fucking think so." We then saw a large knife in Frankie's hand. I didn't have time to think about how crazy this situation was. Jaden and I were now in danger. Suddenly, Johnny sprinted toward me. Before I could even run, he shoved me to the ground and held me down. Johnny was much bigger than me, and it was impossible for me to escape. He grabbed the back of my neck and forced me to the edge of the waterfall. There were no safety bars to prevent me from falling over. Was Johnny actually planning on killing me? I was now terrified for my life. I heard Jaden yelling for help, and I remember seeing him being held down by Frankie, who still had the knife. Both of our lives were now in danger. As Johnny and I neared the edge, I tried my best to break free, but it was no use. I clearly remember him saying, "This is what you fucking get. You bastards killed my uncle." His tone was downright demented. I pleaded with him not to kill me, pointing out that my family was born in America, but he didn't listen. I started to shout, hoping somebody would hear me. Then from behind the 4 of us, we heard a gunshot. Johnny immediately let go of me. There was a man dressed in hunting gear, with a rifle in his hand. Now, before you make any assumptions, let me clear him of any wrongdoing. We were in a non-hunting section of the park, but we were also in an area that bordered a private property that did allow hunting. There is a barrier of fencing that separates the 2 properties, but there are several ways to get past it. This man must have been hunting nearby, heard us struggling, and came running. The gunshot we heard was him firing his rifle into the air.
"You 2, let them go and get the hell out of here."
Frankie and Johnny then disappeared into the forest. The hunter made sure that we were okay and offered to escort us back to the house. We accepted, since we were still worried about Frankie and Johnny surprising us again. If they followed us all the way out here, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility. On the way back, he asked us who those 2 guys were. I told him the truth and said that they were school bullies and that they somehow managed to follow us all the way from New York City to this upstate forest. The man was floored by this, telling us that the kind of people who would go to those lengths are dangerous, and there was a very real possibility they would have killed the 2 of us. We made it back to my parents' property about 10 to 15 minutes later. We had a lot of explaining to do to my parents when they saw us being followed by a man with a rifle. We told them that this man saved us from 2 bullies who would constantly harass me at school. They didn't believe the story at first because, frankly, it sounded insane, but they spoke to the hunter who backed us up. After hearing the full story, they were in shock. After some discussion, we all agreed to go to the local police station, even if it meant the hunter would get into trouble. Under the circumstances, hopefully the authorities would understand. We met the hunter at the police station a couple hours later. We gave our statements as my parents waited in the lobby. They thanked us for coming forward and said that they would try to get in contact with our school back in the city. Hearing them say this put me in a much better mood. The hunter was let off with a warning for discharging his rifle in a restricted area. The remaining time at the country house was pretty chill. I was a bit worried that we would run into Frankie and Johnny at school the next day. But that Monday, I was called into the principal's office before classes started and was told that Frankie and Johnny had both been expelled, and criminal charges were being considered. Although since they were teenagers, the worst that would happen is a stint in juvenile hall. But I was happy to hear that both of these assholes would no longer bother me at school anymore. The rest of my school years went by pretty smoothly. Every once in a while I would still get called names, but it never came to physical bullying again. And I learned not to take it too personally. I never saw or heard from Johnny again, but I did run into Frank one last time in 2019. I was walking on a sidewalk around Times Square, and he happened to be walking in the opposite direction. I don't think he even noticed me. I wish I would have stopped and asked him how he and Johnny managed to follow us all the way to our country house upstate, because I have not got to the bottom of how exactly they were there that day. My follow-up question would have been why he and Johnny were such psychotic racist assholes to me. I eventually moved past this incident, but the memory of what happened almost a decade ago sometimes plays back in my mind and serves as a reminder that there will always be screwed up people in this world.
This happened right after my divorce. It was a very rough time in my life. I was exhausted, stressed out, and needed to get away from everything. I rented out a small cabin deep in the forests of Vermont so I could work on my first novel in solitude. I had never been to Vermont before this. I'm from the West Coast. I chose it randomly because at the time, I was so paranoid that my ex-husband would follow me. Things did not end amicably between us, so I reasoned that Vermont would be the last place he'd ever go looking for me. The cabin was beautiful, surrounded by thick forests with no neighbors for miles. At first, it felt like exactly what I needed. But after a couple of days, I started hearing strange noises at night, scratching sounds on the roof, footsteps on the front porch, and I thought I even heard voices whispering outside at one point. Given what I was going through at the time, this set me on edge. It wasn't just at night either. When I would go outside during the day, I got this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I told myself it was just my paranoia from the divorce, and I wasn't exactly used to being alone in the woods. This went on for a few more days. I never encountered anyone though, so I just figured that perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me. One night, I woke up to a loud banging on my bedroom window. There was no way to rationalize it this time. There was someone outside the cabin. I sat up, heart racing, and looked to the window, which had the curtain drawn. Another loud pounding came, causing me to jump. Who's there? do you have any idea what time it is? No one answered. After maybe 5 minutes of hearing nothing, I peeked out the window. The woods were dark and still. There was no one in sight. The thought had occurred to me that I experienced some kind of night terror, but just to be sure, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way out to the front door. Once I saw that there was no one on the front porch, I opened it carefully, then shined the light into the yard. That's when I saw them. There were maybe 10 men total, standing silently in the front yard and among the trees. All of them were wearing black hoods that covered their faces. In fact, that was the only thing any of them were wearing. They just stood there, like nude statues staring at the cabin. I'm not sure if I screamed or yelled at them, but it wasn't long after they all began to pleasure themselves. I was disgusted beyond words, but then I suddenly became more terrified than I had ever been in my whole life. Those freaks outside could easily force their way into the cabin. I was alone and defenseless. I slammed the door and locked it, then immediately retreated to the bedroom. I pushed a wooden wardrobe in front of the window before praying to God that the landline next to the bed was still working. Thankfully, it was, but I was shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. By the time the officers arrived 15 minutes later, the men were gone. The police took my statement and told me something that made my blood run cold. They had apparently received several reports from other women in the area who had either rented cabins like me or lived in remote locations. It was the same thing. Several naked men wearing black hoods, standing in the nearby woods. The officer told me that he was only aware of one other instance where someone witnessed them masturbating. The police were never able to catch them. They took the reports seriously, but it was unpredictable where they would show up next, even with increased patrols. They theorized this was some kind of bizarre cult ritual. They would make sure the women were alone, possibly scouting locations before they moved in, although they never seemed to attack or break in. It was like they wanted to make sure the women saw them. Most of the time, things wouldn't go according to plan. The women either wouldn't answer the door or a neighbor would see them and start yelling. Either way, the men would disappear back into the forest before the police could arrive. I left the cabin the next morning and never went back, and spent my remaining time in Vermont in a hotel room in Burlington. After this incident, I've done extensive research into this topic over the years. Vermont is a very small rural state, and it does have a history of cult activity. There's also a local urban legend dubbed the Men in Suits. During the 90s, there were numerous reports emerging from isolated areas describing well-dressed men appearing in locations where they clearly did not belong. I guess you could title my experience the Men in Birthday Suits. As I mentioned at the beginning, I do plan on getting the full story published someday, but in the meantime, I'd love to hear.
I broke down near Pope Lick Creek just before sundown, which is about the worst place in Kentucky to have a car decide to take a shit on you. Tasha and I were taking these back roads outside Louisville when the temperature gauge climbed up, the engine started knocking, and steam pushed out from underneath the hood. I eased onto the shoulder and killed it. I could smell all kinds of burning fluids. Tasha leaned forward, looked at the empty road, and said, "Well, that sucks." I popped the hood. Heat came off of it in a wave, damn near boiled the water in my eyes. Coolant had sprayed across the engine bay, and something lower down was dripping steadily onto the dirt. Oil, maybe. Either way, not something I'm going to be able to fix quickly. "You want to mess with it?" she asked me. "I can try, and if not, I guess we're just going to have to call a tow." She got back in the passenger seat and left the door open and propped her feet up on the frame. A minute later, I smelled weed. "Really?" I said. "We're stuck out here, I might as well be high." I didn't argue with her. I went to the truck, grabbed some tools that I had handy, and started working. At first, it was just frustrating. I checked hoses, tightened on some clamps, wiped fluid up constantly, tried to narrow it down to one problem instead of 5 of them. The woods behind us were close to the road, thick and quiet. Branches snapped now and then, leaves shifted, but nothing I looked at twice. Because when I looked up each time, I of course saw nothing. Tasha held the joint out once and I took a quick hit before going back under the hood. Didn't really help with my focus, but it did take the edge off, and suddenly I was a lot more patient. The light continued to fade, everything turning dark underneath the hood now. The tree line turned into a solid wall of shadows. I kept at it longer than I should have, mostly I think out of pride. Eventually I stepped back, wiped my hands on a rag and said, "All right, I guess we need a tow." "Fine," she said. "I'll call when I get back." "Back from where?" I asked her. "I have to pee." "Stay close, all right?" She gave me this look and walked off the road onto a narrow path that cut toward the creek. I watched her until the brush swallowed her up and then started packing my tools back up. Socket wrench, pliers, flashlight, everything was back in order. I was closing the toolbox when she came back faster than she left. Not running, but close to it, and her face looked awfully weird. "What?" I asked her. She kept glancing over her shoulder. "I think I heard somebody." "Where?" "In the woods, a woman, I think, calling for help." "Okay, you're definitely high." "So are you, and I'm not messing with you." Before I could say anything else, now I heard it. Faint, but clear enough to pick out the words. "Help me." It came right from the direction that she'd just been in. We both stood there listening. It came again. Same tone, same distance. It wasn't a bloody murder scream, but somebody definitely needed help. Tasha turned back toward the trees. "We should at least check it out. Or, hear me out, we call it in." "And tell them what exactly? That we think we heard something?" The voice came again. "Help me." I grabbed the flashlight. "All right, just stay behind me." We stepped onto the path. It sloped down toward the creek, dirt packed in places and loose as hell in others, roots cutting across it like a staircase. Sweat beads started running down the back of my neck. "Hello?" Tasha called out. "Don't do that," I said back quickly. If somebody was out there, they'd answer. The voice kept going anyway, same words, same cadence. We moved slowly, and the beam from the flashlight picked up bark, leaves, a flash of water through the trees, but nothing that matched a person. The sound of the creek started to fill my ears and everything got hazy. "Help me." Closer this time, definitely. Then I called out once, but got no response, just that same voice again. All right, this is getting weird. That's when I thought about the stories tied to that stretch of land. Everybody around Lowville had heard some version of it growing up. Something living out around the trestle, something that could mimic voices. Most of it had to be bullshit though, just tied to all the accidents and the suicides. We continuing pushing a line through brush and came out near a creek. The railroad trestle rose up ahead of us, dark and narrow against that little light that was left. It crossed high over the water, old wood and steel, archaic before us. I stopped. "Okay, we're done. Let's go back," I said. "What? She's right here. Look." Something was crouched on the tracks, low between the rails, arms hanging down, head angled toward the trees below. At first, it didn't register as anything but a shape, but then it shifted. "Help me." The sound came from above us. Tasha made this small sound and grabbed my arm. The figure straightened up. It was tall, thin, shoulders narrow, arms long enough to hang past its knees. Its head lifted up to look at us. 2 horns curved up from it, not branching like antlers, but smooth, spiraled, rising back over the skull, that of a goat. It leaned forward. "Help me." Same voice, same tone. Holy fuck. I pulled Tasha back without thinking about it. We turned and pushed through the brush as quick as my feet would carry me. Branches caught our clothes and snagged every 10 feet or so. She stumbled once and I yanked her back upright. And the voice kept coming behind us. "Help me." We hit the road and got back into the car. I locked the doors before I'd even shut mine all the way, and Tasha slid down in her seat, now shaking. It took me a minute, but I called a tow. I had to get the location right. The woman on the line told me it would be about an hour and to stay with our vehicle. We stayed. Pretty soon, the woods went fully dark, blackout. The only light was from my phone and the weak beam of the flashlight when I pointed it out the windows. I could use the headlights, but only when I had to. The voice kept going. Sometimes it sounded like it was back near the creek, sometimes closer to the road. "Help me." Over and over, like a recording. Tasha at one point covered her ears and just curled up against the door. I continued watching the tree line, expecting to see something step out at any moment. We didn't have a knife, a gun, nothing but that tool bag. At one point I swore I saw something moving along the passenger side of the car. Not a hit or a direct hit, just contact, like a hand dragging across it. Tasha flinched and ducked lower. "Don't look," she said, and I didn't. We sat like that, listening, waiting. Every minute felt like forever. The tow truck finally shows up, yellow lights cutting through the trees. Driver gets out, took one long look at us, then glanced back toward the woods. "You two been down by the tracks?" he asked us. I didn't answer him. He just nodded. "Get in the truck, I'll hook you up." We climbed into the cabin. As soon as he stepped out, that voice carried up from the creek again. "Help me." He stopped just for a second, then shut his door and locked it. "Nope," is all he said under his breath. He didn't waste any time after that. Hooked the car and pulled us out of there without another word. The voice didn't follow us once we were on the road, but none of us said anything until that trestle was well behind us. "That creek is the waterway to hell," the driver said. "It's creeped me out my whole damn life." We told him what happened to us. "Well, good thing I showed up, because now you both know about the goat man." When we moved to Lexington, we thought we'd made it. I was 11 and the house alone felt like our ticket into the big leagues. 2 floors, a clean driveway, a yard my dad treated like a gold medal. The street had brick homes, big trees, and people who walked their dogs in the evenings. It felt stable, safe, secure. All those buzzwords a family wants to hear. We moved in there in the early 2000s after my dad got this job, a better one. My mom liked the schools, and Carrie and I were told it was a fresh start, and for a while, exactly what it was. We walked to the bus stop every morning, about 6 houses down past some hedges and a mailbox. Same kids, same routine. No warnings, no stories, nothing that suggested we should be paying attention beyond our own 2 feet. We settled in fairly quickly and school was normal. Weekends followed a pattern. My dad handled the yard, watched basketball, and my mom kept everything else running. Carrie, of course, made friends faster than I did, and I stayed home more than I liked to. Played games, rode my bike, didn't really think too much about it. It felt like a place where nothing bad happened, or at least nothing that could reach us. Our story would change about 6 months in. It was a Saturday morning, and Carrie and I were in the living room playing video games, wrapped up in blankets, while my dad was easing in his recliner with a big cup of coffee and the paper. My mom came downstairs already dressed, keys in hand, and asked if we wanted Burger King. That was enough to get our full attention. We didn't get it very often, so when we did, It felt like a full-on event. My dad told her to grab him 2 sandwiches. She told him he didn't need to. He said he did. Same exchange every time. She laughed, told us to pause the game, and walked out the front door. Back then, the breakfast from Burger King was legendary. Not only did it have the usual breakfast sandwiches, but they had croissants, biscuits and gravy, even those cinnamon rolls. Nummy. For about 30 seconds, nothing changed. Then we heard voices from the driveway. At first, it was normal, like somebody had stopped to talk. My dad lowered the paper but didn't move. The tone shifted. It was a man's voice, loud, cutting through whatever she was saying. And a second later, my mom started screaming. My dad was out of the chair immediately. He told us to stay inside as he moved toward the door, but we followed him anyway. By the time we stepped onto the porch, everything was already in motion. My mom was at the driver's side of the car, half in, half out, caught in an open door. Her purse was on the ground, one leg still in the car, the other flailing. A skinny man in a white tank top was on top of her, bent over, crowding her into the seat. For a second, my brain tried to turn it into something else, an argument, a misunderstanding. But then I saw the knife in his right hand, low and close to her body, and that was that. My dad ran at him and told us to call 911. Carrie grabbed my arm, pulling, and then the man looked back at my dad and drove the knife into my mom's abdomen before pulling it out again. It was quick, direct, no buildup. She made this short, sharp sound and dropped sideways over the center console. Everything was a blur after that. My sister and I were just screaming. We couldn't believe it. My dad hit the man, knocking him off her and into the side of the car. The door slammed and the horn blipped. The man swung the knife and missed, and my dad shouted at us to get inside. And this time, we listened. We ran to the kitchen and Carrie grabbed the cordless phone and dropped it. I picked it up and dialed wrong the first time, 119. No, my hands didn't even feel like mine. I tried again and got through. My mom was stabbed, I said when the dispatcher answered. I stood there with the phone in my ear, looking out through the front window while everything continued. My dad and the man were now on the ground. My dad had both hands on his wrist, trying to keep the knife away, while the man twisted and kicked, trying to break free. My mom was on her side in the car, one hand pressed to her stomach. Her hands were bloody, and so was the concrete under the car. The dispatcher asked for my address and asked if the attacker was still there, asked if my mom was awake. I answered as best as I could while watching it all. Carrie stood next to me, crying in these short bursts, not saying anything. Outside, my dad managed to slam the man onto the hood of the car. The knife dropped and he kicked it away before tackling him again. For a moment, it looked like he had control, but the man just kept fighting, scratching, grabbing, trying to bite him. My dad's shirt tore at the collar as he held on. Neighbors would start coming outside eventually, but kept their distance. Nobody moved in. And that part was really hard to accept, that nobody would come help my family. My mom tried to sit up, and I opened up the front door and yelled at her to stay down. She looked at me, not fully focused, like she didn't understand what was happening or how fast it had got there. She opened up the car anyway and slid onto the ground, right next to her purse. Sirens came in from the main road not long after. 2 police cars pulled up, then another. Officers got out shouting commands, and my dad rolled away from the man with his hands up, yelling that he'd stabbed his wife. The man got to his feet, looked at the officers, then at the knife on the ground. They told him to get down. He didn't. They tased him. He dropped. And even then, he kept fighting as they pinned him and finally got him cuffed. The ambulance would follow close behind. Paramedics moved in without hesitation, cutting my mom's shirt, pressing bandages onto her stomach. My dad tried to get over to her, but they held him back until the scene was finally controlled. I stayed in the doorway with the phone still in my hand until they took her away. My dad got into the ambulance with her, but before the door closed, he told a neighbor to stay with us. Then they were gone. The driveway was left quiet except for the police. We never got breakfast. At the hospital, we were told that she almost died. The knife had gone deep and there was internal bleeding. She needed surgery right away. The words were simple, but the way they were said made it clear how close it had actually been. She survived, but it wasn't easy or quick. When she came home, she moved slowly, kept a hand near her side, avoided going outside alone. My dad would check the locks multiple times at night, and Carrie slept with her light on. I started watching everything in our neighborhood, people's cars, anything that didn't fit in. That man didn't know us. That's what we were told later. There was no connection, no reason he chose our house. He was just moving through the area until he just happened to stop there. After that, the neighborhood felt like a battleground. There were break-ins, vandalism, more police driving through than I ever remembered before. People kept to themselves more. Doors stayed locked. Lights stayed on. Nothing else that happened close to that morning, though. I think we stayed in Lexington for a few years after. Life kept moving because life always does. My mom would fully recover eventually, and my dad replaced that car because she wouldn't sit in that one again. It had a lot of bloodstains that never came out. Carrie and I still walk to the bus stop, but we paid a lot more attention now to every house, to every parked car, every person we didn't recognize. I used to think you could tell where something bad might happen. Now, I know it can happen anywhere. Quiet streets, clean driveway, Saturday morning, even while your mom is just trying to go out and get you breakfast. Driving through the backwoods of eastern Kentucky in the dead of night is without a doubt the most terrifying thing I've ever done. Anybody who's ever been in the area knows exactly what I'm talking about too. All the lights from the moon and the stars are blocked by thick vegetation and the hills, so it's pitch black out there. There's history in those hills too, a lot of history, and that energy fills the place with this crazy bad vibe. It's like the very land is pissed at you, like it wants you dead. A lot of the roads aren't well traveled either. You'll be hard pressed to see a single car driving down them at night. Cell service out there, at least for me, is spotty at best, non-existent at worst, and you pray to whatever you believe in that your car doesn't break down, knowing full well the folks who live smattered across the hills are isolated, very private people. Knowing that, they might not be very happy to see you wandering around their property in the dead of night. None too happy at all. It's what my mom calls bad country, one word. She always told me to avoid the area if I could, saying that I'd likely be murdered or worse out there. I've heard plenty of stories too. Stories about people getting out of their car to help a stranded motorist, only to be ambushed, robbed, kidnapped, or murdered. Stories about strange lights and ghost killers and vanishing hitchhikers and crazy inbred hillbilly families. There are said to be hundreds of unreported deaths out there, people just vanishing off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. I've always avoided driving through those hills, but one night, I found myself on Kentucky Road 52, southbound instead of on I-75 south. Straight into those hills, straight into the darkness. I think around midnight I get a message from my mom, telling me my dad had been taken to the hospital. His condition was serious. I immediately jump out of bed and into my car, despite my mom telling me to wait until morning to drive down. I lived up in Richmond at the time while my parents were down in Hazard. It's a little under a 2-hour drive via I-75. And it's a little over 2 hours via Kentucky Road 52. That night though, of course, I-75 was closed due to an overnight bridge reconstruction progress, so I had to take 52 southbound, and it goes through some pretty gnarly bad country. I figured nothing would happen, that it'd be a smooth yet anxiety-ridden 2-hour-ish trip, but there was this dread that I couldn't shake boiling up in my gut, urging me to wait till morning, but I didn't. I couldn't. It's my dad. I gotta see my dad. I got to Richmond to Irvine just fine, driving through winding roads and hilly terrain with ease, going way faster than the speed limit. It was from Irvine to Jackson that things took a turn for the worst. First off, it was dark, like really fucking dark, even with my brights on, and they still only barely lit up the surrounding area. The constantly curving roads didn't help much either. I found myself slowing down and having to navigate through the dark, around the switchbacks and turns, inclines and depressions, hoping to God I didn't run off the road or hit an oncoming vehicle. And the dread was at the forefront of everything now. Sure, it could have been exacerbated by the worry for my dad, but there's just something about these hills, something evil, and I was really fucking afraid. The radio continued to dip in and out, so I put a CD in, Dio, and tried to drown out the fear with music, but after the first song, I turned off the stereo completely and drove in silence. All my senses were on high alert. It felt evil around me, It felt like I was being watched. Every so often, I would see a lash flight in the woods, like a campfire but brighter. And I swear at one point between Crystal and Beattyville, there was this pale and hairless humanoid running after my car next to the road. I swear, I saw it in the rearview mirror. It disappeared into the darkness in the trees when I braked and spun around in my seat. 30 minutes out of Beattyville, I saw a kid. He's wearing a yellow shirt, blue shorts, and a red jacket, hood up. Colors that reminded me of Superman. He wasn't wearing shoes, and that part bothered me. I flicked my brights down to the normal strength and slowed down to a crawl, wondering what the hell this kid, who looked to be under 10, was doing out in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. I made sure my doors were locked, cracked my window, and asked him if he was okay as I rolled toward him. He didn't respond. I glanced down at my phone. No service. Shit. I asked him if he was okay again, and he looked up at me quickly, making his hood fall down. He was crying. I slowed to a stop, and he immediately ran over, sticking dirty fingers into the crack of my window, pounding on the door. He was screaming something about how they were hunting him and that they were going to let the monster eat him and that they were watching us now, waiting just beyond the darkness. At this point, I'm fully fucking freaking out, and I might have been screaming too. Who knows? I tried to roll my window up while trying not to hurt the kid at the same time, but he wouldn't release his grip on my window. I thought he was going to break it, or at least trying to. Then, out of nowhere, this bright light flashed onto us. The kid screamed even louder, let go of my car, began running down the road, back toward Beattyville. And I'm ashamed to say I took off. I was afraid I was going to die and become another statistic out in those hills. In my rear view, I watched as what looked to be 3 men in hooded robes ran out onto the road. The spotlight one of them was holding was trained onto my car. It hit the mirror at an angle that blinded me, but it looked like the other 2 were going after the kid. I blinked and looked back toward the road, speeding out like a bat out of hell. I pulled off in Jackson and drove straight to the police station. 2 detectives and an FBI agent, who happened to be in town working with a liaison, listened to me with great faces. When I finished what I was saying, the FBI agent thanked me, told me that the kid had gone missing the day before from a Bible camp near Kentucky River. He said that's why he was in town in the first place. Apparently, the kid and his friends were out playing hide and seek in the woods in broad daylight when he just disappeared. He was wearing yellow, blue, and red, like Superman. The strange thing is, his footsteps just stopped, and his shoes were still there. It's like he was lifted off the ground by air. Super weird. Half a dozen cop cars with twice as many cops, the agent, and a search and rescue team were dispatched to the area within minutes of me reporting what I'd seen. I drove to a local diner and ended up staying in Jackson until morning, making the 40-ish minute drive down to Hazard after the sun rose. After hearing why it took me so long to get down there, my mom was beside herself with panic, but was also glad that I was okay, telling me I did what I did to survive, that I was brave, that I wasn't in fact a coward. Thankfully, my dad ended up making a full recovery too. And if you're wondering, I do feel like a fucking coward. If you're asking if I regret not letting that kid into my car, the answer is a resounding yes. I do. I am. It still haunts me to this day, but I don't know what would have happened if I stayed there any longer, and I don't know if either of us would have made it out alive. To my knowledge, no trace of that kid was ever found.